not be ashamed. We're all in the same boat, you know. I really have run up quite a debt to you. Perhaps the time has come.
Has something specific ever changed you? It might have happened gradually or all at once. Obviously, you're a complicated person, but take a memory you know as an inflection point for you. Every so often, a person sees something they realize they've never seen before, and it changes you. Like, for me, this crazy quote once by Pablo Picasso.
It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child.
Pablo Picasso was talking about the painter Raphael, whose magnum opus work was painting the reception rooms of the Pope's huge house in Vatican City. Together with Michelangelo, another contracted artist for the Catholic Church who painted the roof of the Sistine Chapel, they make up the most recognized works of the High Renaissance artistic period in Italy. Those two artists created two very lifelike paintings for Catholics to see and enjoy. Paintings full of realistic creatures depicting different stories associated with Rome and Christianity. Very cool paintings. However, Pablo Picasso notes that it took him just 4 years out of all the time he had been alive to learn to paint with Michelangelo and Raphael's technical brilliance.
But what of the remainder of Pablo Picasso's storied career?
Pablo Picasso, don't you bet he's got a real story to tell?
Like, no kidding, the dude lived through World Wars I and II.
Nothing he paints is anywhere close to as technically impressive as our two friends who eventually became Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo and Raphael, as far as something highly relative like concrete, artistic, technical brilliance can be defined. Pablo Picasso, the man himself though, doesn't care about labels. He became a surrealist master and something deeper instead.
Here, I also need to introduce Zdzislaw Biskinski and William Blake.
Not that the two were one and the same, but rather are two untouchable monoliths Dark Souls wouldn't be the same without. Since I called Picasso a monolithic artist, Biskinski stands apart as an entirely separate monolith. He made paintings I can't at all describe in words, they have to be witnessed. The underlying emotional aspect of Dark Souls that can't really be expressed in words is also found in a few of Biskinski's paintings. You know that you feel that fear, that unexpressed thought you've kept in the darkest recesses of your brain when you see the cycles of miasma, death, and decay captured in these works.
No need to express it. You're seen.
I absolutely adore Biskinski, and I know that Hidetaka Miyazaki has also likely been inspired by his works due to the similarities some of his later games feature to some of Biskinski's most famous paintings. These are like Kaled,
some of the visuals in Bloodborne, especially in the Cathedral Ward,
a few monster designs in Dark Souls 3. There's probably more, but I think you get the idea. Miyazaki likes Biskinski. But what about another creator? Someone who wants to express a sentiment they can only remember, an intangibility. How do you do that? You just give up, right? That's the only solution when you want to distill functionality of something down to its barest essence. Hidetaka Miyazaki didn't give up. If you play Dark Souls, you know the vision for the game isn't all that dissimilar from what Picasso once said about painting. Dark Souls is a modern iteration of Picasso's quote about deconstructing reality, which is what Picasso meant by invoking the sense of painting like a child. You will feel the following emotions in their purest, most undistilled forms while playing Dark Souls: fear, anger, relief, sadness, loneliness, satisfaction, happiness, solidarity, heroism, pity, and all their common variations. The player's experience interacting with the game world in Dark Souls is necessarily part of the intent of the storytelling in Dark Souls. You can't find more fascinating examples of abstract storytelling than creations like Dark Souls and Picasso's art. There was an idea behind Dark Souls that most people have already heard about. Dark Souls had Hidetaka Miyazaki and his team behind it ready to chase their idea of cooperation in a broken and destroyed world. I love all the stories that are behind Dark Souls creation. The information these stories provide about the story that actually presents itself in the game paints a very cohesive image, and I end up enjoying the story of the game a lot more when I'm playing it as a result. A strangely underrepresented aspect of the game is the characters. I love the characters in Dark Souls, obviously. I just want to talk about them. But first, do this. Picture the process behind the creation. A world past its prime, but with a need for content in it regardless. Where does that leave us, the player? Well, it means that we're in the world for a specific purpose, of course, but how will the story be told with minimal contact with others? This fact means that the world itself will need to tell the story, a process commonly referred to as environmental storytelling, but to simplify it for the purpose of the video, the world itself is its own character for our character to interact with, and learn from, and discover things about, and get killed by. The Chosen Undead, Knight Siegmeyer of Katarina, Sieglind of Katarina, Knight Solaire of Astora, Knight Lautrec of Karim. I bet he's got a story to tell. And among the great stories that get told, there's a few that I really want to focus on, and those are the ones with world-spanning questlines you come across as you play. I also want to address the other characters as they appear in the story, but as I was previously describing, all of them are met by the player and the world, which is its own character. Virtually every presentation will be accompanied by some method of environmental crossover. So I will be telling the story more or less as I understand it and through my own perspective. Needless to say, if you've played the game before, you'll probably disagree with certain takes I present about Dark Souls by the end of the video, but you will understand why Dark Souls is a modern masterpiece when we get there too. The first thing that happens upon clicking New Game is the character creation screen. Literally before even the introductory cutscene of the game, which is cool. The character creation screen is therefore created to give a first impression, and it actually has a pretty unique vibe as far as character creation screens go. Upon clicking New Game, you are shown a partitioned screen with information pretty much all across it, except for a 3D model of what is your character. It's on a piece of black parchment. Perhaps a record of your character in jail in the Undead Asylum? I don't know about that, but I also don't really care about that. I'm more interested in the aforementioned vibes on display with the screen. Parchment being black is unique. Parchment is usually a neutral alkaline color, typically like white or tan. Obviously, that white or tan color is always so black ink can show up on it. The black backdrop with white text feels intentional, or in more Dark Souls terminology, undead. You are completely uninformed at this point about anything to do with the game, so to be shown this, it feels like an immediate introduction to a world you are totally unfamiliar with. And it's awesome. No half measures with this introduction, just an immediate fade to this oppressive screen. But I'm also inclined to believe it's highly intentional. Obviously, Dark Souls is hard, but more analytically, of course the character selection screen isn't a half measure from the developer's perspective. This is a living, breathing world, as was the intention behind the world's development. To do anything less than this immediate introduction to the concept of the undead and undeath to the viewer would be an unnecessary and weakening compromise for the game. So instead of some highly video gamey initialization of the player control to select your stats through dialogue with an NPC, the world just starts in front of your face. I mean, we did all click New Game, didn't we? This fact is accented by the little descriptions you're given for the different choices you can make as you build your character. Each choice is a small quarter sentence giving you some further insight superficially into your character, but really, the world you're stepping foot in. I picked the Thief class for my playthrough, which doesn't actually affect much except for the starting stats and weapons, but what my class says about it when I pick it is, guilt-ridden thief. I bet he's got a story to tell. Like I've been talking about, this is still the character selection screen. You aren't even allowed to watch the introductory cutscene yet, and yet I'm already riding with this guy? This asshole? I kid, I doubt I need to be that harsh on this guy. This guy has an entire story you can already start visualizing based just on that line and the visuals you're given. When you see the fantasy class Thief and you pick him, you already have an image in your head of a rogue-esque character with a hooded face and an easily concealable knife as a weapon. When I'm also given the quick 3 words on selection, guilt-ridden thief, all of a sudden, this character has depth. I'm picking a guy who has a past, and all the things that result in this strong feeling of guilt he has start filling my head. I could be picking a guy who's done some seriously bad shit to some seriously innocent people, and the harsh nature of this world would never let his past escape him. I could be a guy who did... I mean, my point is the endless stories you can tell yourself about this character give him serious dimensional quality. I should also clarify that this game is one with a silent protagonist, and that comes with all the typical trappings of storytelling that come with a silent protagonist. But such a simple sentence changes so much about the very first perception of this game's world that it, the game, allows you. Simplicity is the key to this process, which is actually deviously evasive when creating something like this. I know that at a smaller scale it's really difficult to communicate a thought exactly the way you want, so you can only imagine the same thing, but at the scale of a huge fantasy video game's development. That being said, I'm sorry, all this talk about the visuals of the thing. They are great, after all, aren't they? I haven't even introduced you to the special adhesive of all the elements at the character selection screen, the music. The composer for Dark Souls, Motoi Sakuraba, is the man. All the dynamics of this character creation screen is underlined, no, passed through the haunting filter of what is the character creation theme. It wraps the entire experience. Motoi Sakuraba, before his work on Dark Souls, was famous for his work on Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. But my favorite of his work was always what he was able to accomplish with the Golden Sun series. The character creation song is an ethereal, string-heavy piece, making absolutely everything about the selection feel mysterious and otherworldly, which hits differently in a video game. Perhaps the game will expand upon all these little bits of information. The song is apprehensive, as if asking the player to dare to click continue, or really it's there to warn you that you're about to set foot into a truly unknown world. The song is not aggressive or horror movie-esque with a dissonant, quick strings, but it builds slowly and more of a nudge towards the mystical. This banger paints a full picture. I was discussing how this character selection screen is rather atypically abrupt, but that's not really the truth of Dark Souls' design. When you're actually playing the game as it's intended to be played, which is nothing short of just playing it, you get this beautiful theme coupled with the subtle emotions of the short sentences associated with each choice in the character creation. I always feel like I'm really getting a fresh look at Dark Souls every time I create a new character. Starting shortly after we finish character creation, a white mist fades into a screen, with an unnamed narrator's dulcet tones stating,
"In the age of ancients."
Players are treated to a highly introductory cutscene. We actually see the gray mists first and foremost, lending a bit of a stately air to this introduction, as if it were a real history lesson, and then we see the land of archtrees, and among them, magnificent slumbering dragons. The archtrees and dragons themselves are a darker blue color. Typically, the color blue is associated with life in the ocean, but it also has been co-opted to signify royalty.
But here, the blue palette evokes a feeling of slumber and rest.
These dragons are living amongst each other in relative peace. The cutscene continues to carry this restful tone for a brief moment. We're treated to another visual transition of gray mists covering and uncovering our view as we re-emerge to find ourselves delving into a large hole in the side of one of these impossibly scaled archtrees. The narrator is brief.
But then there was fire.
Fire is literally treated as a proper noun in this cutscene, capitalized independently in the subtitles. As we go further into this hole, red and orange embers start to find their way towards us. More and more of them, the lower we go. The color palette is again pretty intentional here. The darkness of our descent is cut short by these orange embers. This is the introduction of chaos. This world is sitting on top of something it perhaps isn't ready for. Going forward, that'll be something to keep an eye on. Soon, we find ourselves deep underground at the source of this fire, but the viewer can understand through their appearance and the following events that they're revealed through that they are simply humans, or rather a race of people emboldened by this new fire. You know this dude, Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight and his faithful knights. I like Gwyn's introduction as we arrive at his Lord Soul because you get to see his entire face. As Gwyn is one of them, the viewer is now watching whatever he'll do next to these everlasting dragons that the flame has enabled him to challenge. That'll be something to keep an eye on. The general vibe of these introductions up to this point is pretty similar across Nito, First of the Dead, the Witch of Izalith, and Gwyn. These characters are all tired of their underground existence at the hands of the everlasting dragons above, and so in all of their introductions, there is a tool present to escape that existence, one which happens to be fire with a capital F. Destructive but also creative. But before creation can happen, must first come destruction. All of these cutscenes carry unsaid anticipation of biblical scales of regime change between the two sides we've been introduced to so far. Them and the everlasting dragons. It's worth mentioning here that a lot of what we deal in when it comes to creation is told through metaphor. But also, we can assume that these Lord Soul claimants literally ready themselves for war against a ruling class of dragons. Like, I mean literally. But so easily forgotten is the furtive pygmy. The furtive pygmy seems to have found a Lord Soul that no one else saw, rewarded with unimaginable power as a result. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Sure enough, there's a battle shown to us. I love the dynamism of the single shot of a silver knight brandishing a sword and a dragon arising out of the bottom of the frame. I like that Nito's entire arm is a massive scythe. Nito really feels like he is death incarnate. He can't even not wield his scythe if he wanted to. The dragons cannot defend themselves using their physically impenetrable scales against a being who wields sickness and death as a weapon. Seath the Scaleless, a scaleless dragon and a truly unique sight, is introduced as having betrayed the rest of the everlasting dragons. Seath's design is a sickly white, with red at his hands like he's one large living mutation. It's fairly easy to deduce that Seath harbored a great resentment to the rest of his kind as he never met their values for dragon greatness.
Thus began the Age of Fire.
I love a good monarchy. Gwyn clearly didn't let his victory over the dragons go to his head. Power is centralized in this city. That'll be something to keep an eye on. But soon, the flames will fade. The narrator says this to literally imply the power granted by fire is transient, as fire itself in our reality is. And since when fire disappears, so too does the capital L light it grants, and only a capital D dark will remain. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark sign. But yeah, and don't get on my case. Don't even trip, big dog. But I probably should have mentioned this, but Dark Souls' opening movie is a full motion video cutscene or an FMV cutscene. Those are usually the ones in video games that stand out as looking way higher quality than the rest because they're not rendered in the game's engine, but rather outside of it. Shortly after we get our first look at the dark sign on this unfortunate dead knight, we hit a loading screen and are all of a sudden inside another cutscene, this time in the game world. I would say for the first time, but that would technically be incorrect because the character creation screen took place within the game world as well. But regardless, we leave the slick and sharp look of the intro cutscene behind to find that we're in an earth and clay yellow corridor made up of stone crudely carved out of the earth with a jail cell at the end. The glory of Gwyn's success and rule over his reign of fire is immediately contrasted by this close-up look at this earthly toned underground brick-laid corridor. The narrator continues to elaborate. The player character, as an undead, has been corralled along with his fellow undead and led to the north. The undead face this persecution as punishment simply for being undead, and are left here to rot away for eternity. I like how the narrator puts it, though. They are here to await the end of the world. This world is ending, and the undead are still subject to the irrational laws Gwyn placed out of fear. There are other undead hollows the camera passes also in cells, all seemingly having gone insane. These are our fellow undead, but they have been discarded for so long and so many years that there is no hope left for them. The hollows are skin and bones and insane. As the hollows mostly attack us on sight, they'll form the basic fodder enemy type for us to fight early in the game. The narrator continues until we pass through the bars and into the cell to find our character. Once inside the cell, the POV shifts. Abandoned by the narrator, our only companion is now our character, resigned and ceded to their fate in their cell. The cell is also walled in brick, but crudely, the floor is stone, denying even comfort of the softer dirt for sleep to the character. A few camera handoffs to different shots around the cell, and the viewer gets a feel for how lonely this place is. Lit only by daylight, with no torches anywhere in the cell, its features appear washed out in monocolor, dirt covered green and tans and browns of the walls and floor shallowly blending together into one dead, uninteresting shade. I'd note that this is what we're forced to look at forever. Our character and the other undead have earned this depressing fate simply for being undead. However, suddenly, someone is looking down at us through the hole in the ceiling and we're alone no more. They drop in a corpse with a white glow signaling an item on it. Suddenly, the atmosphere is different. Our character sees the ceiling helper, a man clad head to toe in plate armor, face hidden by a lowered jousting visor on his great helm. The ceiling helper sees that his presence has been noticed and so leaves us to investigate his new gift to us. His movement carries weight and is noisy, but in a way that I like. When someone is moving or an action is happening in Dark Souls, it always feels like it's happening with weight and intent. Such is the impression these shifting sounds give to all the actions characters take in cutscenes, even when they're doing nothing more than standing up from having taken a knee. Our character stands up in their cell. This is finally the end of the cutscene. After having been handed control, we're given a title card officially for our location. The title card centers on our vision across the screen and plays with the sound effect. Our character also notably looks a little more like beef jerky than you might have remembered from the character selection screen. This state is called being hollow. That information isn't immediately important, but we'll get to it soon. The character's in the Northern Undead Asylum, according to that title card. Investigating the corpse, we find it carries the key to our cell door. Now we can get out. Well, now the character knows what was up with this corpse, and the man that dropped it here likely isn't our enemy. The player leaves the cell to hear weighty footsteps of something, but not in our line of sight. There are simply hollows, as undead who have lose their minds beyond repair are referred to, and a few glowing orange runes on the ground in front of us. These runes, when interacted with, are mostly just an explanation directly to the player of the controls, but in-universe are this aforementioned helpful knight communicating to the player remotely. But since this is a video game, I haven't forgotten that. Let's address the controls of Dark Souls briefly. As a controller of our character, the player is first introduced to how to attack, control our camera, heavy attack, and sprint. Notably, these first 4 messages do not instruct the player how to dodge, but they do give us enough information to test our combat out from a basic perspective. As the undead steps out into the hallway, we find that we can get a better look at the surroundings the camera slid past in our introduction. My first appreciation of Dark Souls once upon a time a few years ago, I'm old, came from how simple the controls actually were. A light attack and a heavy attack. Those are your only 2 ways of attacking. I'm reducing the combat to just these now for a reason. And that reason is that functionally, these 2 are really the only 2 ways of attacking. I know about bows and magic, but really when you cast a spell, you're doing a light attack, and you do literally use the button to do so. Magic casts at a range, which is different from how this introduction to combat in the hallway is presenting things, but if the player thinks about it, it's really just another kind of light attack. I like that. Dark Souls doesn't mess around. There isn't a resource collecting meter to build towards some kind of super form for your character to go into. You simply can attack. There isn't a reward for attacking other than completing a deliberate animation and doing damage to an enemy. I'm overthinking things, but that is a deconstructive approach to combat for a game that came out in 2011. I'm an old man, but I remember video games from the year 2011. A third-person action game doing something like this minimalist approach to combat practically feels like it was a kid on the playground that got dared by the big football player kid who went by the name of Devil May Cry to go stick his tongue on the frozen telephone pole. In this metaphor, Dark Soul earns the respect of that kid. These walls are indeed made of stone with occasional torches placed along the way with no room for anything but further cells, bars, and demonic prison engineering. The claustrophobic atmosphere is most intentionally by design and is coupled with another intimidating sight. As the player moves out, to our right is a massive cell designed to hold something the size of a galleon ship or a large estate. Our ears informed us of the presence of something large nearby, and upon approaching the cell, we can see what? A massive, corpulent, and bottom-heavy bipedal demon roams back and forth between the walls of this cell. The demon's scowling face doesn't seem to take notice of us as it continues its patrol around the area we find it in. The demon also seems like it isn't in captivity here, but rather on a watch, or something. The intro stated that we were corralled here and led to this asylum, so this demon is perhaps one of the guards. It carries a warhammer with an inhuman silhouette, with rigid edges around its pommel and carved from stone. I like Dark Souls for all the little connections to its own world within itself it will draw. For example, with the item description for this great hammer. I like being the overthinker that I am and actually having a game recognize me for it. The description tells us that these hammers are carved from the stone of arch trees we saw in the intro to the video game. I don't have one specific section to address the world building of Dark Souls because, as I stated, the world is deep and layered in the same way a great character would be. I'm mentioning this here because this is a great opportunity to recognize a specific piece of worldly storytelling. This massive demon is a first-time visual for us, and it is very striking as a result. To be able to want to learn more about the demon is great. To then actually be rewarded for our curiosity by something like this demon's personal tool being given a diminutive history if we want to find it is electric storytelling. The players already made their way through most of the corridor, so we continue past this demon that has mercifully remained distracted from smashing us to a pulp if he had noticed us. Past more brick-laid walls to a brick-laid staircase the player goes, leaving the bars of our cell and the other cells we passed behind. Notably, the only sounds we can hear are our own feet on the ground and the occasional hollow we come across. There isn't any music accompanying us on our way out of the cell. This choice is actually incredibly immersive. The silence wouldn't be this immersive if the lighting in this environment wasn't perfect or just right, but we're all alone in an asylum made to keep us far away from any civilization or comfort whatsoever. The player continues running through this corridor and up to what appears to be a well, where a lone hollow sits in the shin-deep water, but this guy is playing around in there like it's not well water. These cells double as a sewer system for the asylum, which of course fits in with the torturous theme of the rest of the asylum. The player moves forward to find a ladder to climb up in an open courtyard. This looks like a common area, but also is perhaps just a nice way to introduce the player to the centralized respawn mechanic that all of Dark Souls is about. The player finding themselves in the courtyard, they come across a sword stuck into the ground and a pile of ash and bones. The prompt upon reaching it is light bonfire. That doesn't really mean much now, but bonfires will quickly become a necessary part of the Dark Souls playing experience. These bonfires will directly address the lonely vibes you've been feeling the game give off by design, up till now. The sound effect and feedback that drops that says bonfire lit will be seen a lot for the rest of the game. But for now, sitting at the bonfire and opening the bonfire menu briefly is really our only interaction with the bonfire. The only life around this courtyard are weeds growing out of the ash and dirt that sits around this place. Sitting in front of the player is another short staircase up to a door exiting the courtyard to whatever next oppression this asylum has in store for us. The animation for opening that door is so slow and deliberate and actually has speedrun tech to skip it because of how slow it is. But actually, the lack of speed for opening it is one of my favorite things. I don't really feel like explaining myself for this in greater detail, but I hate God of War's mashing minigame for door opening if you've ever played it. There's so many different kinds of door opening animations across video games. I actually don't feel all that strongly about most of them except for two. God of War's, which I already stated, I absolutely hate. And Dark Souls, which I would marry if I could. The slow, labored, Herculean process that your character undergoes in their task of simply getting through these giant obstacles of your progress is so satisfying, and you can't get hit out of it. That means if you're running from a pack of enemies, you can find one of these prompts, hit it, and watch your character iframe their way through all attacks that could possibly hit you. This is immensely satisfying. When I discuss how Dark Souls is a beautiful Picasso-esque deconstruction of popular video game design, these small details are what I'm talking about. Having things like doors be an annoying and necessary minigame for you to progress to the next area, and I shake my head. A video game should be about playing the game, and if the game is a door opening simulator, then simulate doors opening. But Dark Souls is an atmospheric action game. Let the game be about the atmosphere and action. Dark Souls utterly removes any semblance of contact with reality on Earth by allowing you to purely be inside of the fantasy you're intended to be in. In reality, opening a door is a marginal task you don't really think about. Certain games will try and make you think about opening a door like it's equivalent to the more important parts of the game, like the combat or the story. Dark Souls handles something like that perfectly. I digress. On the other side of this door is a courtyard of vases? The sun is also shining in this area, and this wide open space is immediately threatening. Stepping forward, and a giant demon, like the one the player was just looking at, jumps down in front of us, and another orange rune on the ground tells the player we have no chance. Run! It says. Now a frantic, anxiety-inducing song plays, and we, as a new player, will probably run around like a chicken with its head cut off trying to find out exactly where to run to after reading this message. The song is a choir in an operatic style, theatrically frightening. After a few times hearing the song, most players will no longer feel its intended effect, but as a first-timer with nothing but silence in the hallways up to this point, and maybe perhaps with a few assumptions about Dark Souls based on its reputation, you are now fighting the Asylum Demon with a capital A and D, but the player has to find their way through these vases for a place to run to. Look quickly enough and you can see some bars lit on either side by a pair of torches, the only one in the room. The vases are a cheeky way for the developers to make this not a free gimme play for the player. If you screw up even a little bit, the Asylum Demon will flatten you and you get the legendary "You died" message. After passing through the gate, it immediately closes shut behind us. Realistically, this process has nothing to do with any storytelling, but even this can be explained by the presence of the player's helper knight who let us out of our cell. He seems to have rigged the entire asylum for our success. I'm again certainly overthinking it, but that's the kind of headspace you'll find yourself in Dark Souls, finding a reason for everything to fit into the game world. Through the gate, the player is back in the bowels of the asylum. Immediately after escaping the Asylum Demon through the gate, the player is down a flight of stairs into another bonfire, looking very similar to the area we first saw after getting rescued. Another few messages and the player picks up some items corresponding to the starting class we picked. In this playthrough, I was a thief, so the target shield was on a corpse. A hollow stands in a long hallway plinking the player with arrows. After the player just escaped the Asylum Demon, your next challenge is to get through this gauntlet without a weapon. The hollow shoots the player with arrows, but you have to run up to it and he'll just retreat around the corner. After escaping the Asylum Demon, this new hallway is also layered with sunlight, not the dark and dank environment the majority of the asylum has been up to this point. These quick glimpses of hope among a dark and threatening level are core to the way Dark Souls will handle its atmosphere. This hallway made me feel a lot better about my chances the first time I stepped into it. You might find this weird, but it's actually one of my core memories of this game. At the end of the hallway, my character's bandit knife awaits. The hollow ran around the corner back into an alcove, and now the player has to kill it after having equipped the weapon they picked up just now. The player's back into a hallway in an area where they can see the bonfire they had rested at below. This is the bonfire from before the player opened up that big-ass door before the Asylum Demon. This sight makes the player feel like a professional cartographer the first time through. Dark Souls doesn't have a map that you can open up on a pause screen, but there's an effect in the player's brain when you happen into an area you've already been in and you can see it from a different angle. This fact is very well documented, but Dark Souls 1 is a masterclass in level design, but really, most of the games in this series are. Before the player steps foot into this familiar area though, a wall of fog blocks our way. You can walk up to it and get a prompt to traverse the white light, which is another satisfying locked-in invincible animation. New players don't have this frame of reference yet, but fog gates, as they're called, are almost always placed before an entrance to a boss and are intended to let the player know that there's probably danger on the other side. However, because Dark Souls is Dark Souls and has a reputation for being difficult, occasionally you'll get what are called false fog gates that are simply placed in levels intended to make you question whether you're ready to pass through the gate or not. These gates create beautiful little moments where the player is forced to pass through them because you have enemies at your back, risking losing a bunch of progress to a hard boss you haven't fought before, or being rewarded for your guts to chance it by simply being allowed to progress further into the level. There are actually very few of these false gates in the series going forward, but Dark Souls does not ignore this little psychological game within the game the player is periodically forced into. The gates seem harsh at first, but I have fond memories of gambling and winning and losing on my first playthrough of the game. In addition to invasions, this little design aspect is at its best here and gradually got worse as the series progresses. I don't hate how things ultimately turned out, so you don't have to worry about that. My point is, Dark Souls 1 has this microscopic little bit of character to its world that you can't find anywhere else except for Demon Souls, and I love it. Immediately upon passing through this fog gate, the player can see the Helper Knight resting on the other side of a set of bars. That knight has already been the central focus of this asylum traversal the Undead has been making so far, despite only being sighted literally once until now. That Helper Knight is inaccessible until we move around his immediate area a little and are ambushed by a giant cannonball being rolled down a set of stairs at us as we try to climb them. That'll be something to keep an eye on. This staircase also marks the player's first shortcut in the game, but I want to visit with Oscar of Astora, whose room is now open due to the cannonball plowing over us into the wall, keeping us from getting to him.
Oh, you. You're no hollow. Thank goodness. I'm done for, I'm afraid. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I wish to ask something of you. You and I are both undead. Hear me out, will you? Regrettably, I have failed in my mission, but perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family: thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the Undead Asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringest the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know. Well, now you know, and I can die with hope in my heart. Oh, one more thing. Here, take this. An Estus flask, an undead favorite. Oh, and this. Now I must bid farewell. I would hate to harm you after death. So go now, and thank you. Now I must bid farewell. I would hate to harm and...
Oscar's presentation here is definitely intended to evoke a tragic sympathy from the player, wearing the elite knight set, dying under the light, and entrusting the player, who shall henceforth be referred to as the Chosen Undead, with his mission. Oscar hands the player the Estus Flask, which more or less completes our fundamental mechanics in gameplay. Approaching Oscar, the player finds a few other messages that tell us about rolling, which is usually the most popular way to avoid damage, because it really is just the easiest. I mean, it is the easiest with the exception of the fact that when locked on, the roll is locked to the 4 cardinal directions, which would be addressed in future games. This doesn't actually break the game because selectively locking on and off in combat actually makes most encounters very easy. The Elite Knight set is a heroic looking set. Oscar wearing it definitely feels like it was also part of the emotional plucking at the player's heartstrings, looking like a knight in shining armor who failed in his quest. Oscar will tell the player that he's going to die, appealing to our shared undead heritage, with him to tell us he needs us to go to Lordran, undertake the sacred mission of the Chosen Undead, and ring the bells of awakening. Oscar's message ends cryptically. This will result in the Chosen Undead's fate simply becoming known. I like it. The small reveal you get is enough, but it's not too much, and since you're playing Dark Souls, you follow the linear path obediently anyway. But the player should be wondering exactly what mission they're undertaking at this point. Oscar's no longer the same helpful-seeming knight, instead more of a man who did all of this with a clear ulterior motive in hindsight from him first rescuing the player. Oscar is, however, on the verge of death and thanks us that this mission will be carried on by the player as it was passed down to him. Oscar isn't even really sure why he's doing this. This reads as some sort of brainwashing instilled in Oscar since birth, since he doesn't really know anything else. So with his dying breath, Oscar charges us with the same mission. It's all very lean storytelling. I like that. Oscar's entire sequence quickly introduces the mission of the undead, and that he hails from somewhere where his mission is passed down in legend, increasing the scope of the world. Oscar eats shit hard, implied to have fought and lost to the asylum demon the player encountered earlier. He graciously asks that the player leave him so that when Oscar dies in Hollows, which is still something of a mysterious process to the player, that he will not attack us after death. Oscar will immediately die upon exiting this room, the player's first exposure to an NPC dying. It plays a now iconic sound that players often associate with the end of an NPC's quest line, and we can run back to him to see him fall over. Oscar's defeated posture is a great visualization of our newly reacquired lone, lonely presence in this asylum. Only one obstacle remains now that we have our class's default weapon in the Estus Flask. I know you're waiting for me to address the Estus Flask, but this isn't a great spot for that. With Oscar dead, the player can finally get down to business and look at the first real shortcut in Dark Souls. Shortcuts are basically their own characters in the Dark Souls series, as I briefly alluded to a while ago. I don't want you to go all the way back there though, this is the perfect spot to look at shortcuts. Going down the staircase outside of Oscar's room, the player can find a closed door to the bonfire I was gushing over earlier. Seemingly innocuous if you've never played the game, but if you have played the game, the player knows that this is the opposite of innocuous. I know that the Undead Asylum is the tutorial level of the game, but since shortcuts will become a lot more salient and profound later in the game, let's look at exactly what this one is doing here. As the player first did the cinematic escape from the Asylum Demon, they were fed into a level where we basically played out a Mario, or Demon Souls, World 1, Level 1. All the player had to do was run past or kill a single hollow, but to follow the intended path back up the stairs in this shortcut story, we'd simply be running back to the Asylum Demon boss fight. Dying to the Asylum Demon would respawn the player back at the bonfire near it that we found quickly after running from it. However, opening up this door creates a shortcut. That quick door opening is the full, immensely satisfying shortcut Dark Souls opens up in your visualization of the level, a process you immediately recognize as a first-time player. Ignoring this special door would create a long loop where you'd maybe die to the Asylum Demon, and have to take this circuit back to Oscar's room every time to fight the Asylum Demon again. Opening the shortcut activates some psychological process I'm not informed enough to name. This loop places you immediately outside the Asylum Demon's room again. We're getting killed, even though that's hard to do against the Asylum Demon, but hey, as a new-time player, it really isn't. Instead respawns you next to Oscar's room that the player can now immediately run back to because they completed the circuit. I already said that this process is so iconic that it basically has become its own character at this point, and it's utilized with varying levels of effectiveness from here on out. Now, proceeding on the correct path, I will say the level becomes fairly linear. I also want to say that's not at all a pejorative statement. In fact, Dark Souls is a fairly linear game at large, a cohesive design decision fitting entirely within the original vision of its creation. Oscar has given the player a key to a previously locked door, and the player moves up the stairs to find themselves at the highest point of the Undead Asylum, a balcony overlooking an immense horizon-eating range of mountains. A few hollows attack the player up here, and at this point the player will have a fairly good grip on the combat. However, I like that this encounter tests your ability to mentally observe multiple enemies at once. These mountains forming the backdrop of this encounter excellently completes the feeling of true irrelevance and isolation of our character's current situation. The player has been given the means to escape and a weapon to do so, but the fierce resistance just a few enemies provide really places the intentions that whoever placed the player here never really expected them to escape. I actually still sleep on this encounter sometimes as a new-time player, and have died here on subsequent playthroughs. That'll be something to keep an eye on. However, if the player isn't really bad at video games like I am, you'll finish here relatively quickly and can take in your surroundings. Again, another fog wall. Listening closely will make it pretty obvious there's a boss on the other side of this fog wall, and the Asylum Demon's breathing is easily heard. The reality is also pretty obvious because the mental map of the Asylum the player is definitely working with at this point places the room on the other side of this fog gate as the room where the player originally encountered the big bad Asylum Demon. So seeing as there's a cryptic message again in an orange rune on the ground that says, "Take the plunge," the player moves up to go to fight the demon. Interacting with the fog gate has our character pass through to find ourselves on a small alcove looking directly down. It's immediately apparent that the message left by Oscar means for us to jump down on this Asylum Demon we're now looking down at its head with an attack. So as the player is going to love to want to do, we do it. Falling off the ledge and hitting the attack button puts the player into a plunge attack animation. The demon, who's here to introduce this mechanic, is helpless to stop this. He could, but I like to think this is canonically where the chosen undead just ran and jumped recklessly at the head of the big bad demon before it knew we were there. The player's reward for taking the plunge, as the message told us, is that the Asylum Demon gets a free 40% knocked off its health bar as a gimme for the player when it gets hit, before we have to actually destroy it. No Vanguard and Demon Souls here. I know how slow this fight seems now with the hindsight of Elden Ring being a new evolution of the Dark Souls combat formula, but the Asylum Demon on its own merits and with the context of the time the game was released really did require the player to learn its moveset. A common phrase. I say learn its moveset because of the deliberate, virtually analog approach Dark Souls takes to combat. Many games adopt a magnetism into their combat. It's something very subtle, but if you're playing, a game like Devil May Cry, you'll notice that simply pressing the melee button near an enemy in the process of attacking you without pressing any other button will automatically make your hero swing their weapon in the direction of the enemy, like you're magnetized to it. Dark Souls reduces this process. This reduction is a beautiful deconstruction yet again. Obviously, pressing attack and swinging your weapon in Dark Souls puts you into an attack animation, but if you do it without hitting lock-on first, your character will simply ignore the position of the enemy and just swing exactly where your camera is pointing. I'm no game dev, so I won't bother presuming to name something like this that almost certainly has something it's internally referred to by those in those circles. But the result of this feeling is a feeling of aiming all of your attacks. This process is all done within a framework of having a stamina cost from a resource bar that refills automatically. Most games have a mechanic like this, but I haven't really gotten into what makes this implementation in Dark Souls unique. The first real boss fight will perhaps test this implementation. It perhaps won't, but my only point of presenting this dichotomy is that the player may not even notice this mechanic. The player can just lock on to the Asylum Demon and achieve a pastiche of the magnetism effect. But it will become very obvious as you play the game that you aren't having your hand held even with something as simple as placing your attacks on an enemy. I could present this fact as an epic tribute to a legacy of a very famously hard video game. But what I don't want to do is present this fact in a way that's not true, because my previous statement doesn't really describe the full story. I really want to present this attacking mechanic as a result of the full trust placed in the player to land their attack. That's more or less the entire video thesis condensed into a single line, which I think is kind of funny. Dark Souls frames its entire analog process of attacking as a decision which will sometimes be correct and sometimes not. I'm going to come full circle here and address that feeling that this whole thing evokes as something akin to jumping on a Goomba's head in Mario, or even successfully capturing a piece with your knight or any piece in chess. The result is a payoff you've gotten from the developers for them trusting you to complete their cycle of encountering an enemy, fighting them, avoiding damage, and landing the attack. Breaking it down like this sounds lame as hell, trust me, I'm aware, but I do need to note what isn't obvious to people who've never played Dark Souls, because I really do love Dark Souls. The Asylum Demon pulls from its moderately varied moveset to attack us. The demon has a pretty easy to predict moveset, with some swings of its hammer and crush attacks with its massive body. The player's default weapon does fairly solid damage to the Asylum Demon, and with conservative play, which is always busted in OP against Souls bosses, pretty much to this day, will go down in a few well-placed hits. The Asylum Demon is the sole guard of the Undead Asylum, as the player has come to realize. The demon drops the big Pilgrim's Key. If the player's a real overachiever, you'll read its item description to realize that it opens the massive door in the area you beat the Asylum Demon in, but more interestingly, this key is apparently intended to land within the possession of a chosen undead pilgrim. I don't need to really belabor in detail the very mystic atmosphere this game is working to and successfully placing in every place the player can look. With a new major achievement under the player's belt, our first boss kill, we're free to move around the arena and go through the big door, which is the obvious way forward. Passing into what appears to be a graveyard precariously built into a sheer cliff with an immediately fatal drop into a bottomless ravine over its edge, the player's at the edge of the asylum. This site is a beautiful visual. The land simply ends there with the shoddily paved road indicating certain progress in the level. It's not clear whose graves these are, but a deduction based on the highly intentional mystical presentation of everything up to this point seems like these would be graves of those who tried to take on the Asylum Demon before the player and failed. Laid to rest here perhaps as a sign of respect? I realize how goofy the visual of the Asylum Demon burying the undead is, but perhaps it leads the remaining not yet hollow undead in some forced labor to reduce the corpse count. Either way, the location seems to indicate a lack of space to bury corpses because it'd be really easy to just dig yourself to your death into the incredibly deep ravine and fall to your death. Look at all that death down there. The player is treated to a final cutscene that caps off the tutorial as we approach the edge. The narrator makes a surprise return as the player gets a highly stylized shot and explanation of our quest. In Legends, as it is stated, the player will be kidnapped by a giant crow who shows up directly in front of us at the edge of the mountains. The pure kino, cinema, whatever you want to call it of this scene, cannot be understated in seriousness. Scale is emphasized with low camera shots to a vast horizon, and then our character sits in center frame in an anticipatory way. Then a giant crow snatches the player. The crow is rapidly introduced in an incredibly dynamic way, rapidly filling the very same camera shot I mentioned with oversized talons outstretched towards us in the most tasteful use of slow motion I've ever seen to give the player a full look at this captor crow as it spreads its wings before us.
Only in the ancient legends it is stated that one day an undead shall be chosen. leave the Undead Asylum in pilgrimage to the land of the ancient lords. Lordran.
The player transitions to a shot of it literally hoisting us in its grip through the air to an unknown location. The game doesn't flinch and fight the moment with any sort of unnecessary music at all, leaving the already captivating ambience to punctuate and underline the scene. The narrator states the player's destination is Lordran. A POV shot is transitioned to. The player can see a castle town built on top of a forest from our literal bird's eye view. Guard towers, high walls, and parapets fill our sights. The crow swings the player around to a more remote-looking location as we rapidly descend on it from the crow's grasp. That's our next area, as the player can deduce, as we completely leave the asylum behind. The crow roughly drops the player into this new, unfamiliar landscape as we take in the details, and the cutscene finally ends. My comrades, in solidarity, I want to introduce you now to Firelink Shrine. If this memorable world is a character and is written with the depth of a great one, well, to fit that same clunky metaphor nicely, Firelink Shrine would be that same character's expressive face. Firelink Shrine's theme plays as soon as the player regains control of their character. Firelink Shrine's theme is one of 2 area-specific themes in the game. This fact doesn't really register the player's first time ever in Firelink Shrine, with the difficulty of the game making it highly likely you'll be dying and respawning at the bonfire and hearing the theme every time. However, the power in this theme is accented by the lack of themes for areas ahead. When the player does make impressive progress into the Undead Burg ahead, and still fails and dies, losing all that progress, the first thing they notice upon respawning is Firelink Shrine's mournful theme. This is a bold choice by the developers because it greatly depends on the personality of the player whether or not this theme will feel mocking. That'll be something to keep an eye on. The theme fits nicely with the immersive atmosphere everything up to now the game has built up. The theme doesn't feel mocking, it's an acknowledgement that the game is difficult, and you are recognized for having made another attempt to succeed. The theme is a very string-heavy piece, almost purely orchestral. Motoi Sakuraba's name hasn't been written anywhere in the game yet, but his presence is felt pretty much everywhere. Mr. Sakuraba's music is so impactful that when it isn't there, you're wondering what tricks the game may try and pull on you. Firelink Shrine is visually a green, overgrown, and ruinous area centralized around a bonfire that sits lower in the ground. The engineering of Firelink Shrine is reminiscent of an ancient gazebo or stage. Stone ruins are visible, but the green overgrowth on them gives the impression of a place forgotten by time. Firelink Shrine is a comfortable place when the player is there. You don't feel rushed or anxious, but rather like you've earned a moment to yourself. Firelink Shrine also marks the introduction of the soft RPG mechanics of Dark Souls. When the player kills an enemy in Dark Souls, you acquire their souls. This exchange is a resource counted up in the bottom right of the player's screen, and when you die, you lose all of them. Sitting at a bonfire while having enough souls to level up will allow the player to increase a stat by 1 for an increasing amount of souls. Each time a stat is leveled up, the player's overall level increases by 1. The higher your overall character's level, the more souls it takes to increase a single stat. The catch to all of this soul market playing is that if you die while holding any amount of souls, the player loses all of them when they come back to life. I lied, the player actually has 1 chance to get the souls back, but if you die twice in a row without doing so, the souls are gone forever. The player just needs to get back to the spot where you originally died to do so. Firelink Shrine is also a hub area, meaning it acts as a fulcrum connecting multiple areas together that run through it, as is a well-documented fact about the game. The player can go down to New Londo ruins, the catacombs, Undead Burg, or the Valley of the Drakes if you start with the Master Key. I like that the player has choices, but the intended path is the Undead Burg. The difficulty presented by this fact to the player without instruction isn't something I'm going to talk about here, but rather the beauty of the continued mental cartography the game world encourages the player to make. If you do choose to investigate all the paths right away instead of going straight to the Undead Burg. Greetings. Work got you down? Are you one bad day with your boss away from tearing all your hair out? Get away from the stress of daily life. Fly Lordran Air and enjoy our VIP suite, the Firelink Shrine. Flip your perspective with a trip down to the atmospheric New Londo ruins. The elevator is just a few steps away from your suite. The locals will be sure to give you a warm embrace and a kiss on the cheek. Or take a hike. Instead, take the scenic route. The wildlife in the Valley of the Drakes is to die for. indulge in a history lesson. Visit the graves of those who came before. Just watch out for my crazy Uncle Lester down there. He's an amateur fire twirler. Oops, he gotcha. What a scamp. But don't worry, if you're more of a city slicker, a quick trip down to the Undead Burg will have you spoiled for choice in all the city shopping you'll get up to. Don't forget the souvenirs for back home. The player is introduced to the first NPC at Firelink Shrine since Oscar of Astora at the Undead Asylum. The crestfallen warrior is sitting a few feet away from the bonfire and has an immediate air of contempt for the player upon interacting with him.
Well, what do we have here? You must be a new arrival. Let me guess, fate of the undead, right? Well, you're not the first, but there's no salvation here. You'd have done better to rot in the Undead Asylum. But too late now. Well, since you're here, let me help you out. There are, actually, 2 bells of awakening. One's up above in the Undead Church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blighttown. Ring them both, and something happens. Brilliant, right? Not much to go on, but I have a feeling that won't stop you. So, off you go. It is why you came, isn't it? To this accursed land of the undead? Ah, your face. You're practically hollow. But who knows? Going hollow could solve quite a bit. What? Restoring your humanity? Well, there are a few ways to go about it. Collect it bit by bit from corpses. Or you can butter up a cleric and get yourself summoned. And the quickest way, although I'd never do it, is to kill a healthy undead and pillage its humanity. Coveting thy neighbor is only human, after all. What are you looking at? Don't try anything clever. You might regret it. What? You want to hear more? Oh, that's all we need. Another inquisitive soul. Well, listen carefully then. One of the bells is up above in the Undead Church, but the lift is broken. You'll have to climb the stairs up the ruins and access the Undead Burg through the waterway. The other bell is back down below the Undead Burg, within the plague-infested Blighttown. But I'd die again before I step foot in that cesspool. Bloody hell, what is it now? You ask too many questions. What now? I'm not up for chatting. Leave me alone.
The player walks up to the warrior and he remarks that we've been tricked into coming to this land. The warrior tells the player that we're not the first to have made it this far with the intention of fulfilling the duty of the chosen undead. He doesn't say it directly, but the crestfallen warrior's air of superiority seems to indicate he's on the same quest and has decided it's not possible for a simple undead like he or the player to be able to fulfill the requirements for such a quest. The warrior does indicate that he's experienced some level of success in gathering the intelligence that there are actually 2 bells of awakening for the chosen undead to ring across the lands. The first is somewhere down below, and the other is somewhere up above. One in Blighttown, and the other in the Undead Parish. These places are 2 areas the player hasn't been yet, so we just have to hear out the rest of what the crestfallen warrior has to say. Even the warrior just says that something happens when both bells of awakening are wrong. The crestfallen warrior is supposed to be someone the player questions as morally objectionable. The warrior implies that he's killed people to retain his humanity and stop himself from going hollow, and it's probably this way because he's completely given up.
too depressed about the insurmountable scale of the quest set to him. Simply caught between not wanting to jump off the balcony of the burning building the warrior is in, but with flames at his back giving him little choice otherwise. The warrior is actually a highly pitiable character, his uninviting edge a coping mechanism for how truly lost he is. The player will come back to the warrior to see what his fate ultimately is, but there's nothing we can do for him now other than continue on in his name. Firelink Shrine is a hub area, meaning that it stands to reason other undead besides ourselves use it the same way. Petrus of Thorland is another NPC in the area, through a few crumbling doorways in the ruins and up some stairs. Petrus is also sort of a dick to the chosen undead, clearly annoyed by us when we talk to him multiple times.
Hello there. I believe we are not acquainted. I am Petrus of Thorland. Have you business with us? If not, I'd prefer to keep a distance, if possible. Hello there. I realize that I have requested that we retain our distance, but I also want you to know that it is not meant in ill will. Here, take this, as a token of peace. No, go ahead. It's for you. Oh my, you again. Oh, I know. How about this? I have to await my companions here anyway. So what if I were to teach you some miracles? Would that please you? Very well. Then first, a covenant with the gods. Now let me share my miracles. Only their ultimate effectiveness will be determined by your efforts and your faith. My companions are Milady and her young knights. She is young, but burdened by an undead mission. We are her defenses, to keep her from harm. An undead mission? Regrettably, I cannot share that with you. But you are my pupil. Perhaps if you show your faith. Very well. I can surely tell you, of all people, undead clerics are given a mission to seek kindling. Kindling is the art of feeding bonfires with humanity. Through kindling, we shall one day be granted magnificent powers. Very well. Undead king through. Come again. The effectiveness of the teachings depend upon
Nonetheless,
your faith.
Petrus is patient with the player and offers to teach us miracles. Petrus is here to await his companions and their fair lady. These characters are this mysterious fair lady's escorts on their own undead mission as clerics to find the rite of kindling. That's all the player currently has in Firelink Shrine out of a few item grabs, one of which is arguably the best weapon in the game. Weapons are different in Dark Souls, they belong to classes which are differentiated by their movesets. I'm going to continue on to the Undead Burg. It's the path leading up and to the left and into an aqueduct. The chosen undead is back in sight of the same stone-engineered brutalist medieval architecture, a few hollows standing in our way. An aqueduct feeds the player out into a brand new area. The Undead Burg is a burg, an archaic name for a city or an organized medieval community. And certainly this new area is an area full of what appears to be medieval-styled city dwellings and apartments, however, no longer with any sign of intelligent life anywhere in sight. The player's out in force now, fighting our way across a city of hollows, keeping us from progressing. The player's only real opposition are these former undead who seem to just attack sentient beings on sight. The level design is resplendent with verticality, falling up and down to different planes for items and secrets. Everything in the Burg is a tight living space and claustrophobic. Impressive because this level is designed like a video game first, but everything in it feels like running around in an abandoned cityscape. There's just a few hollows here and there, but the player's not going to be stopped now. At about the 33% mark of the level, a dragon shocks the chosen undead. The undead's literally stopped in their tracks as an unexpected dragon lands briefly in front of us, the shockwave sending our character into a reeling animation. The beast is huge and flies away immediately, indicating that the player's presence is truly insignificant to it. Nothing in this world finds the chosen undead threatening, because there's no threat such a puny being could actually pose in a world ruled by beings empowered by the fire. That'll be something to keep an eye on. The Burg is highly overgrown, albeit less so than Firelink Shrine. The Burg has clearly been kept more recently than the shrine. The area appears to be full of foot soldiers of Gwyn's empire, basic militia men who may or may not have been occupying this area upon the introduction of the undead curse. More sadly, this place might even have been their home they lost to their own insanity.
There's a merchant down a flight of stairs here also, slightly out of the way of any enemies, almost as all NPCs in this game are. The precarious connecting and stacking of safe zones versus danger zones in Dark Souls is precise in an immensely satisfying way. The undead might be sitting there interacting with a merchant one room away from an enemy, but the aggro won't pull into that room. But the aggression the undead feels from that same enemy when you're actually fighting it is surprising. The intention of the level design can be easily felt. The undead merchant has a sit-down stall set up next to a bloody wall. The blood could just be from some unrelated struggle, but its ominous presence during your entire conversation with this merchant suggests to me that the merchant committed murder and stole the wares he's now selling. This blood is another bit of intentional environmental storytelling. That bloody wall tells us that this world is a living, breathing being, with things happening away from the chosen undead, and that the world does not revolve around the player. The large feeling of the scale of the world contributes to the lonely and insignificant feeling the chosen undead's been experiencing up to this point in the game. Enemies always respawn after the chosen undead's rested at a bonfire in Dark Souls. Exceptions to this rule include these Black Knight enemies that undead can fight in these levels. The Black Knights are special warriors the undead finds in zones, without a feeling of consistency to their placement, who are intended to feel like some of the hardest enemies in the game. The Black Knights are dignified, silent killers who attack you on sight, which betrays their actual intelligence. Despite the knights being hollowed beings who have lost their mind, it seems that you don't forget your training when you've identified yourself by it for your entire life. The Black Knights are clad head to toe in black plate armor, standing as tall and proud as they once did in life. Instead of belligerent zombies like the hollow soldiers that populate the game up to this point, the Black Knights are casual assassins whose attacks reflect the discipline and precision they were raised on, as soldiers of Gwyn. So even though the knights are hard, they can be parried, which the Thief class excels at. I got this big fella down in about 3 or 4 hits. The knights are also wearing the same armor as the knights in the intro to the game, but not silver. No longer silver. That'll be something to keep an eye on. Rest in peace, King. I'm on my way to kill your boss. I know you, I hope that means something to you. Bye. I love you. There's a little trap where a hollow rolls a flaming barrel down at the undead. And what do you think our character has to do? It's literally like Donkey Kong. The undead progresses up into a guard tower and up onto a turreted wall through a fog door. Unlike the false fog doors, this one doesn't dissipate behind you, so there's a boss somewhere ahead of the undead. But right now, it's not in front of the player, just an empty walkway across the top of a castle wall. Behind the undead is a ladder up to the top of the guard tower that led us to this spot, and there's a couple hollows taking cheap pot shots at the player from behind. Let's kill those hollows real quick, they're annoying. However, the unease of this room is palpable. There's still no boss and the undead knows they're in for one. Someone, somewhere. Well, clearly we were mistaken. Oh no, it's a Taurus demon! Halfway across the bridge, I mean it's the Taurus demon. The Taurus demon is a slight step up in challenge from the other boss the player's faced so far. The demon will pull out some moves with his giant great axe and try and smash the undead. The undead can hug his legs and make safe attacks in between his 2 and 3 hit combos to relatively effortlessly take the demon down. The Taurus demon shares the same theme with the Asylum demon. That means the Taurus demon is a relatively insignificant player in the scheme of things, and the naming convention of the Taurus demon, implying a faction of demons exist in this world. The undead need not dwell on the demon for too long. He's a footnote in a much larger story. I will give the Taurus demon credit for being the first real boss of the game, however, and having a slightly more unique arena to be fought in. I like the narrow space forcing the undead to adjust their spacing more precisely in the fight. The immediate area following the Taurus demon is striking visually. There's a highly curious area that seems like a messenger roost for large messenger beasts to land. I believe this roost was intended for drakes. Standing in this area now, though, is the man Solaire. Solaire's back is to the undead, gazing out into a sunny horizon, blissfully unaware of our presence. This fact is definitely intended as characterization from Solaire.
Ah, hello. You don't look hollow, far from it. I am Solaire of Astora, an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight. Now that I am undead, I have come to this great land, the birthplace of Lord Gwyn, to seek my very own son. Do you find that strange? Well, you should. No need to hide your reaction. I get that look all the time. Oh, I have a... The way I see it, our fates appear to be intertwined. In a land brimming with hollows, could that really be mere chance? So what do you say? Why not help one another on this lonely journey? This pleases me greatly. Well then, take this. We are amidst strange beings in a strange land. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. The very fabric wavers, and relations shift and obscure. There's no telling how much longer your world and mine will remain in contact. But use this. to summon one another as spirits, cross the gaps between the worlds, and engage in jolly cooperation. Of course, we are not the only ones engaged in this, but I am a warrior of the sun. Spot my summon signature easily by its brilliant aura. If you miss it, you must be blind. Oh, hello there. I will stay behind to gaze at the sun. The sun is a wondrous body, like a magnificent father. If only I could be so grossly incandescent.
Solaire will greet the player jovially and express gratitude that we're not hollow. Solaire drops a very interesting line during our conversation with him. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. This line is a questionable line that's seen some scrutiny for possible mistranslation from the original Japanese script. The line can be used to excuse plot holes in Dark Souls' story, but also is a valid presentation of connections made in the story to explain difficult to understand plot points. Solaire dropping this line actually strikes me as nicely congruent with everything else the story has presented so far. The Undead isn't given an explanation for the almighty fire or dark outside of there's some kind of intervening divine powers, so it stands to reason that time is also affected beyond our comprehension. Solaire also introduces the cooperative multiplayer function of Dark Souls. He gives the Undead an item that allows you to signal to others in other worlds or timelines that your spirit can be summoned to help with boss fights. Solaire has a reputation among the fanbase as being the jolly cooperation guy, deservedly so. Solaire's enthusiasm is infectious and immediately contrasts the oppressive atmosphere the game has overwhelmingly exhibited up to this point. I've talked to many people about Dark Souls, and most of them agree that the consensus favorite NPC across the fanbase has to be Solaire, but now the Undead has to hit the lonely road again. As the Undead moves on from our friend Solaire, we see that the only path forward is an ominously wide open bridge. A few people who watch this may have seen H-Bomber Guy's video on Bloodborne, but if not, I'll summarize his points on environmental storytelling here and how they connect to this bridge. When a player encounters a bridge in a video game, you probably think it's just a place to connect one area to another. That's literally what a bridge is, after all. However, what's quite unique is that this site of a bridge with nothing on it will fill the player with dread. This bridge is again cohesive with design of the world. The Undead's been taught to expect ambushes, and you definitionally cannot be ready for an ambush. In Dark Souls, the player has a deliberate style of attack they have no choice but to rely on. The player is encouraged to be on their feet to quickly turn the tables in an unexpected encounter, and this bridge spells danger to the Undead. The new lack of cover under an open sky, the hollows placed in a cinematically distant way from the player. The sight of turning the corner to see this bridge is an incredibly immersive feeling to actually understand the danger your character is in. Caution is warranted, and with hindsight, the correct choice. As soon as the chosen Undead steps back onto the bridge, the Hellkite Drake who shocked us earlier fills the entire bridge with a huge blanket of fire breath. The Drake kills everything on it, but will usually leave the player within one hit of death, but not dead. The chosen Undead's given a second chance by the developers to find the one place you can immediately get to escape this danger. There's a staircase down to a small storage area below the bridge where the Undead can pass below the dragon safely. However, the cooler part is this shortcut the Undead can open up to the bonfire in Undead Burg. You eliminate having to run through that entire loop where you fought the Taurus demon above the wall and can just spawn below the dragon. Continuing onward now to where the Undead knows we'll find progress, we pass through a dank and secret little alcove. This location brings the player up and around to the next area, the Undead Parish. The chosen Undead can see a gate ahead that leads up and into the church proper. That'll be something to keep. But for now, the Undead encounters a Black Knight placed in surprisingly close proximity to where we enter the parish. Also, what else do you think is up here? There's a giant aggressive armored boar. This whole area feels quite chaotic. A fire where bodies were burned at the stake rages, and there's multiple enemy ambushes. A hollow runs ahead of the Undead and closes a gate, forcing us to take the scenic route underneath the church up and through the back. All these events happen in real time. The chosen Undead can easily miss most of these real story events by simply having your camera turned the wrong way. That fact is an advantage for any game to have. Pure trust in the player by the developers. There's a Baldur Knight on the way there, another highly disciplined foe who is hollowed but not totally without some semblance of their former self. They're a Berserk reference. The Undead also gets a glimpse at a large gate into what looks like a medieval castle. It's closed, but the player can approach it and investigate. Another fan favorite NPC finds themselves here is Sigmire of Katarina.
Oh, forgive me. I was absorbed in thought. I am Sigmire of Katarina. Quite honestly, I've run flat up against a wall, or a gate, I should say. The thing just won't budge, no matter how long I wait. And oh, have I waited So here I sit, in quite a pickle, weighing my options, so to speak. Still closed. Still closed.
He laments that he's unable to solve the problem before him, how to pass through this locked gate into this large castle we can see from the parish. The undead also continues down the stairs to find that the game has opened up in a big way, an entirely new area, the Darkroot Garden. The garden is a 180 atmosphere swing from the parish and the Burg. It's a forest. The Darkroot Garden sits at a low point in the kingdom, with tall trees providing cover from sunlight, making it feel like a land of eternal dusk. There's some humanoid-shaped enemies that appear to be entirely made of trees. Again, silent except for the same ambience the Chosen Undead has experienced up till now. The continued application of this silence lulls the undead into a sense of focus as you explore. I'm only going to dip a toe into the Darkroot Garden for now because the player will return here later in our quest when it becomes more important. Anyway, strong Ocarina of Time vibes in this area. Back to the immediate area of importance, the Undead Parish. Chosen Undead does find their way into the church ultimately, where a few more Baldur Knights await, in addition to the biggest non-boss, non-dragon enemy we've encountered so far. They're called Knights of Baronic, and they're huge. This knight guards a secret the player definitely wants to get to. The undead fights it, but more likely just runs past it to this peculiar double-gated mechanism in the wall. And you really don't want to miss this particular double-gated mechanism. Stepping inside, the undead finds it's actually an elevator, which we couldn't see before we got in. Where do you think this elevator takes us? All of a sudden, Firelink Shrine's theme. Mind blown, man. I mean, it's just the coolest thing. This shortcut is the best shortcut in the game. Such a statement is of course a matter of taste, but the players likely struggled to get up to this point in the parish. The whole journey has been a fight to the top, feeling more dangerous and higher up the longer it took. When a new player has given up hope, it's immediately restored by a shortcut that eliminates the entire circuit you've run up to this point. The player's back home in comfort at Firelink Shrine. The music there is home, man. The undead's now got a moment to relish the cool thing they've just accomplished. Take a second and reflect on your quest. This journey has brought you to one of the bells of awakening. This mystical bell that will do something when you ring it. What it does almost doesn't matter, and why would it? The chosen undead's already come this far. You're gonna ring that damn bell. The player will find themselves back up in the undead parish with their new sense of security about exactly where they are. The chosen undead can find another NPC locked up in the back of the church, seemingly placed in a location intended for whoever's left there to be forgotten. There's a mystery key to be picked up in the area, and if you found it, it goes to this guy's cell. This is Lautrec of Karim, and he's among the more memorable characters in the game, right along with Solaire and Siegmeyer of Katarina. But Lautrec's memorability comes from a usually more negative connotation that players associate with him.
Oh, still human, are you? Then I am in luck. Could you help me? As you can see, I am stuck without recourse. Thank you. Yes, sincerely. I am Knight Lautrec of Karim. I truly appreciate this, and I guarantee a reward. Only later. Yes, very sorry. Your reward will have to wait. I've just been freed. Allow me some time. I am free. Now, I can get back to work.
You see, NPCs appear and disappear and reappear at different locations in this game. It's just how quests work. The world turns while the player makes progress and effects change in the world in different ways. Lautrec of Karim will make players aware of this fact in a brutal way. For now, we're close to that stage of his quest, but not quite there. Lautrec will ask the undead to release him if we don't have the key, and thank us for doing so when we do it. Lautrec will just sit there and look at us. What's he gonna do? He's just gonna keep sitting there. That'll be something to keep an eye on. Another wild-looking enemy is in the parish along with the undead. That's a channeler, and he'll absolutely wreck the player with a trident. The channeler is also a mage character, was the first we've seen of this type of guy. The buffs that the channeler casts have a great animation. This dance looks goofy the first time seeing it, but what the hell do we know about what it takes to summon powers from the divine to mystically reinforce the toughness and durability of your allies? It would probably look like this weird-ass dance that the channeler does. Sorry, Chan bud, but you too have got to go. Wow, the undead's all the way at the top of the parish already. There's a boss to fight up here, in addition to Solaire to be summoned for the fight if the player wants. That's a spoiler, there's a small boss fog wall for us to pass. It might not be a boss
boss behind that one. No, it's a boss. It's a step out onto the roof of the parish with a delayed start to the cutscene. Treated to another low cinematic shot of our character stepping up looking at a group of gargoyles guarding something. One of the gargoyles comes to life and starts attacking the player. I'm not really doing the actual dynamism of the cutscene justice, but that's why the cutscene is a cutscene. It's great and my words are poop. This gargoyle is the next boss and Bell of Awakening guardian, the Bell Gargoyle. The Bell Gargoyles are another very memorable experience for a first-time player. Up until now, there's been a loaded promise by Dark Souls that when it's time to fight a boss, it will be a difficult but ultimately one-on-one encounter. Well, the Bell Gargoyles say no to that sentiment. The Bell Gargoyle's boss fight is a legendary movement all new players have where suddenly the user interface of the game betrays you upon getting the initial gargoyle down to about 60% health. A second health bar appears on the screen also labeled Bell Gargoyle, meaning this boss fight is actually against two of these guys at once. The fight's not actually that hard, but the panic that it's designed to instill in the player has years of people complaining about the fight online as proof that the design worked as intended. In reality, the first gargoyle has a somewhat limited moveset with a few halberd swipes, an airborne tail swipe, and a fire breath attack. All these attacks are very easily avoidable with proper stamina management. Sorry little bro, you probably died because of that. The panic that the undead feels upon realizing the second gargoyle is mostly limited to actually just his fire breath attack until his brother is dead dissipates pretty quickly. Kill both gargoyles now. With another boss kill under our belt, we've got some newly earned confidence. There's a bell tower right there as the undead's quest has pointed to. The chosen undead rings that bell to kick off another cutscene. It's not really that cool of a cutscene, it's just a cutscene of the Bell of Awakening ringing. The undead parish is over, except for this other NPC, Oswald of Carim.
I am Oswald of Carim, the Palm. Thou art a friend. For thee, a warm welcome. Cometh thou to confess, or to accuse? For indeed all sin is my domain. Thou art welcome any time. It is only human to commit a sin.
Oswald doesn't really do that much either, but he's clearly drawn up to make the player question his intentions. Oswald suddenly appears at the bottom of the bell tower when he wasn't there on our way up, and speaks in riddles about his profession as a pardoner and immediately greets us as a friend. Oswald's a vendor for the best gesture in the game in purging stones, which heralds some serious danger in the game ahead. But for now, this guy just kind of laughs at the player unprompted and stands there seeing if we're going to do anything about it. I don't know, maybe you'll attack him as a new player. I know better, so I don't, but he's a jackass at first impression. Speaking of questionable intentions, the player can return to Firelink Shrine at this point.
Ah, hello there. I have your reward. Please, accept it. I am grateful to you for freeing me. Not enough for you? Well, let's not be greedy now. By the Lords, your face. Your humanity is really slipping, but there are methods. Most fools have more humanity than they know what to do with. Now, who do you imagine will make the best use of it? Oh, hello. I'm considering a change of location. I have a rather pressing matter to attend to up above. That keeper has served me well, but enough with her.
Lautrec of Carim makes an appearance. Lautrec sits apart from the Firekeeper of the Firelink Shrine bonfire. That character's name is Anastasia of Astora, and she fulfills the role of the tender whose soul is inherently tied to the bonfire oasis of Firelink Shrine. Lautrec of Carim rewards the undead for freeing him in a suspicious way. Everything Lautrec says is suspicious. He laughs in our face to end the interaction, but you should definitely talk to Lautrec again to get an idea of his next move. What do you think he's gonna do? He's gonna keep sitting there for now. Also, Lautrec's gonna change location, but it's worrisome that Lautrec also mentions that the Firekeeper across from him is part of his plan. Among the items the chosen undead picked up on our way through the Undead Burg in the Parish is the basement key. This sequence is always a trip my first time back in a long time. Forgetting the door to get to the next level, the lower Undead Burg, is actually one the player passed on the way up to the Parish. This sequence is a curious little bit of design. The player will know they can't open the basement door when they pass it, but the door, not having any description to go along with it, doesn't have a noticeable connection to the basement key until the player tries it in the door. The undead will probably wander around for a while after beating the gargoyles in the Parish, not knowing what you're doing wrong, and you aren't doing anything wrong. The player just doesn't know where the basement is their first time through. This sequence is probably some kind of mistake on the developer's part because very few other doors pass in and out of your memory the way the basement door does. Regardless, the player is now in the lower Undead Burg, the residential ground level of the Undead Burg. A few thieves took advantage of the chaos above to pillage the lower Undead Burg, and they make up the majority of the enemies down here. There's just one NPC in the lower Undead Burg, not counting the female undead merchant, and that is Griggs of Vinheim.
Somebody! Anybody! Help me! Unlock the door!
Damn, I'm finished. How did this ever happen? Brilliant. You opened the door for me. Thank you. I'm saved. I thought I might never escape. I am Griggs of Vinheim, a sorcerer of the school. I am much obliged for your assistance. Thanks to you, I may now resume my travels. Oh, hello. I'm fine. I will rest a while, then return to Firelink Shrine. I have my sorcery, and I will be more cautious next time. Besides, I have an important task at hand.
Griggs is a sorcerer who will thank the player for rescuing him from the house he was locked into. Griggs' only real use is to teach the player sorceries, but he'll also tell you about another important NPC, Big Hat Logan. Logan comes later. For now, Griggs is the player's affable rescued sorcerer who tells us he'll wait at Firelink Shrine and that he'll gladly teach us spells if the player's up to it. He's a really splendid fellow. Down in the lower Undead Burg though, besides Griggs, there's no further signs of life. The sun doesn't reach the lower Undead Burg the way it reaches upper Undead Burg. Many fires rage all around and feral dogs roam the streets. The ambience absolutely insists on remaining present in the lower Undead Burg. A small shortcut back to the regular old upper Undead Burg is available, but it's not as strong as the main shortcut you can find at the lower Undead Burg. This shortcut is another beautiful one that takes the player back to Firelink Shrine, again eliminating a loop of running around. The female undead merchant greets the player as we find this shortcut. Capra Demon is a tricky boss. Capra is who the player will run into after finding our way to the end of the sidewalk in the lower Undead Burg, and the third boss with the title Demon in its name. Demons in Dark Souls are actually less so satanic underlings and more so their own race. Through a few items, the player can piece together that the Japanese appreciation for the word demon varies pretty greatly from the Western one. I do like that the Capra Demon is referenced by our old friend the Undead Merchant to have moved into his spot in the lower Undead Burg. Capra seems to have earned the ability to control these rabid dogs, and so the Capra Demon is our second gank fight after the Bell Gargoyles. Capra is one of the first bosses who will force the player to learn one of two things: to selectively lock on and off in combat, or to dodge his two-handed machete-swinging, stamina-eating attacks instead of shield blocking them. I don't want to undersell the difficulty of this guy. When I first played the game in 2011, the Capra Demon made me quit for weeks. New players, if they fight the Capra, should really just give them a bit of extra effort because once they do, the game opens up a big time. If the player beats the Capra Demon and the game still hasn't clicked for you, you're probably just kind of a natural. The Capra Demon is, despite not following the Western traditional idea of demonhood, visually a goat-headed beast, which has roots in the biblical association with scapegoats for sins. The development team of Dark Souls, being Japanese, is drawing on famous European folklore and history for many of its visuals. Knights in plate armor is not common imagery in many classical Japanese legends, and I love that the Japanese take on all of these things that are pretty trite without some kind of interesting spin on it, like Dark Souls puts on it. Capra Demon music isn't really connected at all to my ideas about the inspiration for this fight. The music is another operatic piece, but a little more understated and demonic to reflect the smaller area and the enemy. The Capra Demon's human characteristics combined with his goat head add a bit more of a hell vibe than the Taurus Demon and the Asylum Demon, our two previous demon bosses. The Capra Demon has a two-handed overhead attack, which I'm almost certain is designed this way to connect fighting game knowledge to your experience here if you have it. His most dangerous attack. The dogs in Capra's arena will stun the player out of attack animations, easily killing you if you don't space properly around them. It's very safe to ignore all enemies, run up the stairs in the back, and bottleneck one dog at a time up to you, reducing the pressure to get kills. The Capra Demon, when alone, isn't hard. The rest of his attacks are just basic 1-2-3 hit machete. The Capra Demon drops the key to the depths, the player's next level. The depths are elaborated on in the key item description as being a place of banishment from the Undead Burg. Based on this description, you wouldn't assume it's also a sewer. But that's the cruelty of the Undead's persecution. They're simply forced to live where no one else is, and that is the labyrinthian depths. New players at this point are pretty familiar with the tricks Dark Souls will pull, but the depths can be a particularly cruel one. The depths are a dank, unlit sewer system that is populated with hollows and one important NPC, Laurentius of the Great Swamp. Laurentius has been trapped here by the monstrous undead butchers who wear sacks on their head.
You. Here, over here. Please, you must help me. Thank you. I would have been a supper without you. Been eaten alive. I shudder to think. Thank you. Thank you dearly. I am Laurentius, of the Great Swamp. I will not forget my debt to you. Oh, hello there. I'm fine, thanks to you.
He'll simply thank us for saving him. His next stop is Firelink Shrine. Basilisks live in the depths and can curse the player. That's the cruel trick I mentioned, it being cruel because a new player probably won't be reading item descriptions and know how to alleviate the curse, and then have to run all the way out of the depths to do so. I know because it happened to me. I got cursed and ran all the way out of the depths as a first-time player. I remember actually thinking this was the most bullshit thing that had happened to me so far when it did. But something changed in me when I got over my frustration at repeatedly dying to the Capra Demon. I knew that there was some solution somewhere and that this game was actually eminently beatable. Being cursed permanently halves your HP until you banish the curse using an item or pay someone else to absolve you of it. It was ironic that this debuff is what finally pushed me over the edge to realize that no matter what, I was going to beat Dark Souls for the first time. I hadn't played Demon Souls before I played Dark Souls for the first time, and this ensured that I eventually would. My indoctrination was complete. Most players having gotten this far will likely reach a similar conclusion. Dark Souls sets up rules and punishes the player very hard for not following them. That's what makes it unique. It actually just locks you out of content if you aren't willing to engage with the game on its terms. That's where the refreshingly old school difficulty appreciation rhetoric comes from about Dark Souls. That wasn't really a trend in game design at the time. It was pretty unique. I don't need to talk about it that much because it's been discussed to death. The depths are no different from the previous zones musically. The player will start to notice an echo here to things Laurentius and Domhall of Xena say though. That's the other NPC down here in the depths, Domhall of Xena, a trader from a strange land. Domhall doesn't have an in-depth quest associated with him. He's just an interesting fellow who hails from the mysterious Xena and notably will sell the player the armor of bosses we've killed. This fact doesn't have an in-universe explanation, but it could be explained by an overthinker such as myself that Domhall is an intelligent survivor following us around and foraging after our battles. Domhall uses the phrase Shmwe when greeting us, which is Welsh. It's a chill thing you say to greet other people. That'll be something to keep an eye on. The depths also feature the only other enemy besides the Taurus and Asylum Demon who can be plunge attacked. It's a giant rat without a boss health bar, and it's not notable for anything else besides being disgusting. The Depths is, in totality, the ending of World 1, if you will, of Dark Souls. The Depths is a dark and disgusting place that features mostly hollowed enemies, but also amorphous blobs of living slime with an unpredictable sneak attack from the ceiling. The enemies and design here definitely feel like the nightcap of the story of the first level of Dark Souls. The sewers toss you around and makes you pay for the smallest mistakes if you aren't careful. There's a bell of awakening that needs ringing, and you aren't going to let another bit of Gwyn-subsidized Burg infrastructure stop you. The Gaping Dragon awaits the player. The player's first reaction will be a definite what the fuck when you see his now infamous introduction cutscene. The Gaping Dragon is the boss of the Depths, and one of the remaining barriers between yourself and Blighttown. The Gaping Dragon's a crazy hungry guy, and he has a giant gaping maw instead of an abdomen with countless teeth that are actually his ribs all over it. The Gaping Dragon is described as a descendant of the ancient art dragons the player saw all the way back in the intro cutscene of the video game. The dragon's story is one that has high Japanese stylings. He's a dragon driven underground and transformed by the strong negative emotions that came about as a result of the war against the bearers of the Lord's Soul. It's implied that the dragon literally physically transformed formed over time as a result of constant exposure to strong negative emotions from above like hunger, gluttony, and greed. I like that even I raised an eyebrow at this originally. If you're really uninteresting like I once was as a child, you're probably going to read this and literally wonder why the dragon didn't just die if it was so hungry. However, the real strength in being lucky enough to experience the works of people different from you is getting to add to and build on your worldview, and the Japanese perspective on emotions is something that ended up really informing the way I think about things. What about you, friend? That'll be something to keep an eye on. The Gaping Dragon actually has a pretty limited moveset. The dragon will do a tail swipe, a few claw swipes, a bile spewing attack, and a slam into the ground using the torque of his long body. The dragon will also fly into the air and land again as an attack. The easiest way to beat the Gaping Dragon is to just let him torque slam, charge at you, and hit one of his back legs when he stops briefly. This strategy works for all melee weapons, and you can pepper in ranged attacks if you have them. Easily rinse and repeat that, and he'll stop bothering you real quick. The Gaping Dragon drops the key to Blighttown upon defeat. That's the player's next vector for progress in Dark Souls. In 2026, Blighttown has earned a reputation, but back in 2011, there were GameFAQ posts and stories and YouTube comments, and that was how you were getting the majority of your information about the game. The entrance sits right next to the Gaping Dragon's arena. Entering the area, the player is hit with an abrupt change in lighting. This change is so jarring that it has to be a mistake, but also it's only associated with Blighttown, and the literal atmospheric barrier is one of two you run into in Blighttown. Blighttown has a theme of poison and toxicity. As soon as the player enters, you're facing off against giant club-wielding enemies who will likely distract you from the sack-wielding pot shooters who infect you with toxicity. Poison and toxicity are status effects in Dark Souls. They're the same status effects, but not really. Poison slowly drains the player's health and isn't actually that threatening to be affected by. Toxicity rapidly drains the player's health and will kill you if you aren't managing your Estus carefully until you find a way to cure yourself of it. Blighttown has a reputation for a slow frame rate, creating a nearly unplayable level. It absolutely did when I first played the game in 2011. Blighttown is massive, one of the biggest areas in the game, and certain products of the protocol used to create it chafe against each other and cause it to chug. I played it on the DS Fix patch for the Prepare to Die edition on PC, which fixes all the issues with frame rate, but this area was absolutely unplayable once upon a time. No real pass to give for that one. Blighttown is a solid area overall, though. There's a lot of danger within its verticality, which hasn't really been a huge part of the world up to this point. Blighttown has tilting walkways and difficult to navigate terrain. Careful movement will help, but you're going to die to the environment a few times as a new player. The reputation of Blighttown has arguably never recovered from the release of the game, but it's a nice answer to the increasing focus on verticality the levels of Dark Souls have been experiencing up to this point. Blighttown is pretty decrepit looking. Chosen Undead can establish that virtually everyone here was infected with some kind of sickness and quarantined from the rest of the world, as evidenced by the massive locked door, and that it's also unable to be accessed through New Londo without the master key and undoing the seal. That information's not relevant here, though. Player's going to find our way through this upper shantytown area, passing all the unsavory residents as we do, and happening upon this strange parasitic being. This enemy is the only one of its kind in the game and has dynamic animations. It's this weird enemy that actually makes Blighttown truly unforgettable to me. The lore is already so slight and this area is so unsightly, this creature causes you to create connections in your brain about what might actually happen in this area. Some guys are still going to give you a hard time with their toxic darts on the way down. These assholes are stationed at various difficult to reach places among the scaffolding and pressure you to make anxious runs forward, increasing the possibility of you taking the short way down to Blighttown's ground. As the player advances, the resistance becomes more fierce, and the enemies become more mutated. Fighter guys who seem to have some kind of ability to spew fire start stepping into the player's path. The goal is to get to the bottom and ring a bell of awakening, and there's plenty of opportunities to get poisoned and toxicked on the way down. The player will also encounter the infrastructure and view of the Undead Burg and Firelink Shrine if you peer upward from the right spots, showing how interconnected the level design of this world is. Blighttown is built in the lowest part of this valley that the Burg is situated on top of. The Golden Age of Gwyn that the player saw in the opening cutscene didn't account for this place. Blighttown is actually built on top of a swamp. As the player descends through the shantytown, you'll see it appearing below you. Those spider dudes become more plentiful and suddenly giant mosquitoes will swarm the player. You're definitely being pressured to find somewhere safe all the way down, and it doesn't become any easier when you finally reach the bottom of the swamp. The Chosen Undead's movement is impeded and slowed, and the mosquitoes will follow you all the way down here. The principle of wall following will help a new player at this point, because the bottom of the swamp is when the area becomes truly huge. The area shockingly doesn't feel empty, with items in most nooks and crannies the player can look, but the only real place for the player to go right now is towards the next bonfire. The bonfire is around here somewhere. I know it is. I know it's somewhere here. I know.
I know.
Yes, as I know, the bonfire is right inside this lovely little alcove that seems to be the bottom of the well that we crawled down when we first entered Blighttown. The player's journey all feels highly cohesive in Dark Souls. There's a very apparent mound of what appears to be silken thread coupled with gnarled tree roots that stick out like a sore thumb at the bottom of Blighttown. The player can't miss it when you first get a chance to breathe and look around at the bottom of the swamp. The bottom of the swamp contains our next target. This silken mound stands out from the wooden planks composing the rotary pulley lift and buildings of Blighttown as a wholly unusual structure. The mound's not made by human hands, but the residents of Blighttown stand guard over it regardless. There's a couple of boulder-throwing ogres who can hit you from a solid quarter football field away. These enemies have a few attacks that you can mostly just bait out, run around, and kill. I guess Quelaag didn't really hire the best help for her personal guard. There's a few guys with bulbous, tumorous growths who are worshipping outside Quelaag's sanctum, though. Quelaag's domain is the name-drop title card the player receives upon entering this area. There's a small entrance with a fog gate and obviously leads to a boss on the other side. The cutscene for Quelaag is like that one bit in Always Sunny where Brad Fisher finally gets to Charlie in the high school bathroom. Quelaag's cutscene sends you on an emotional roller coaster.
I've been waiting a long time for this.
You know me, bitch!
Oh, God!
It makes sense that Quelaag's a witch too when you finally do lay your eyes on her. Quelaag is one of the Witch of Izalith's original circle of daughters and seems to have merged herself with a large lava spider. Do you merge yourself with large lava spiders very frequently? Her boss health bar reads Chaos Witch Quelaag, and she fights like a Chaos Witch. Quelaag fights with bunches of lava and fireballs, just like we knew the Witch of Izalith to, and has a fury sword that can extend with the power of chaos. All things considered, Quelaag's difficulty doesn't match up to her strength in universe. Quelaag's attacks are pretty easy to circumvent. Most of the time, sticking Quelaag's left or right side and unlocking will make her sword attacks miss, and her fireball spewing attacks have such clear tells the player can always clear out before they hit. Those attacks are also insanely easy to dodge. The one attack that Quelaag does that can cause problems is her relatively subdued area of effect explosion that can just one-shot you depending on your magic defense. But stick to those basic rules and Quelaag will go down in a number of hits. Also, Quelaag's lava will remain on the floor, creating hazards for you to avoid during all this. It makes up for her relatively easy to deal with moveset. Quelaag's theme is again fairly subdued for a boss and another operatic piece. Dark Souls sells itself on its ambience, and the incredibly theatrical boss music punctuates these game segments perfectly. The bosses are a big deal in Dark Souls, and you're expected to feel like you're encountering an ancient evil too difficult for the chosen undead to contend with. But as an individual piece, I'm not too big a fan of Chaos Witch Quelaag's theme. Quelaag's boss fight is our first direct encounter with one of the Witches of Izalith. That'll be something to keep an eye on. After plinking away at Quelaag for long enough, she'll die. Quelaag's arena leads conspicuously to an open room behind her. What do you think there is to be found there? I'll be damned, it's another Bell of Awakening. The player's almost rung the second Bell of Awakening and unlocked the coveted Upon doing so, the player gets another dynamic cutscene in contrast to the first bell we rung. A giant pulls a chain after an establishing shot of the Undead Parish that opens a massive gate. I ran by Siegmeyer of Katarina earlier. Siegmeyer was in front of the massive gate that was just opened, the gate to Sen's fortress. Apparently that opening of the gate was the fate of the undead spoken about in legend. Suddenly, something actually happens in the story, and the questionable aspects of this story are amplified. Ringing the two bells of awakening actually opened the gates of Sen's fortress. If the story felt unreal or dreamlike before, it suddenly has started feeling very tangible. The story has converged into a single path forward, the road through Sen's fortress, and the tangible goal of reaching its end has now made itself clear. Leaving Blighttown up to the Firelink Shrine again, a few new familiar faces have shown up for the player to interact with. Firelink Shrine has died. More specifically, Anastasia of Astora is dead, who was necessary to keep the bonfire alive. Lautrec of Karam is gone from his spot. Lautrec killed Anastasia and doomed the player to running from remote location to remote location because the centralized Firelink Shrine bonfire no longer works. That'll be something to keep. Laurentia sits cross-legged behind the wall the Crestfallen Warrior sits on the opposite side of, on some rubble. The Crestfallen Warrior didn't expect the player to make it. The warrior will run through a dialogue line about how we rang one bell and another. The warrior actually gives you advice about forging weapons and comments on Griggs and Laurentius both having made appearances at Firelink Shrine. Any positive message the Crestfallen Warrior has for the player is said through a lens of scorn. Don't you ever think to forge your weapons? For example. The Crestfallen Warrior will also express annoyance at a very new particular guest in Firelink Shrine. Kingseeker Frampt is very weird looking. Frampt's indescribable appearance is neither frightening nor comedic, but something truly blurry from a design philosophy perspective. Where do you think he goes all the way down there? Frampt will tell you all about the Lord Vessel, but not really much else. Frampt seems to be here to tell the player about the next step in the chosen quest for a certain undead, with Oscar back in the Undead Asylum being the first step. Just an all-around great time for first-time players. Frampt is a liar, which is hard for first-time players to ascertain, but you can undergo a series of events in Darkroot Garden, New Londo Ruins, and the Abyss respectively to unearth this information about Frampt. Kingseeker Framпт's half of the story sounds like a heroic tale and placement in history for the player to overcome the trials of the fate of the undead and succeed Lord Gwyn, trademark. However, a hop, skip, and a jump through the Darkroot Garden to meet our friend Sif, who will be a boss. She'll drop the Covenant of Artorias, a symbol of traversing the Abyss. The ability to traverse the Abyss is famously associated with the knight Artorias, a legend in the land of Lordran for holding back the Abyss from swallowing the land whole. Taking the ring down to New Londo Ruins, felling the obstacles in our way, and traversing the Abyss ourselves, the player can meet Darkstalker Koth.
Greetings, undead warrior. I am the primordial serpent, Darkstalker Koth. I can guide thee and illuminate truth. The truth I shall share without sentiment. After the advent of fire, the ancient lords found the 3 souls, but your progenitor found a 4th, unique soul, the Dark Soul. Your ancestor claimed the Dark Souls and waited for fire to subside. And soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained. Thus began the Age of Men, the Age of Dark. However, Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark, clinging to his Age of Fire, and in dire fear of humans, and the Dark Lord who would one day be born amongst them. Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature by sacrificing himself to link the fire and commanding his children to shepherd the humans. Gwyn has blurred your past to prevent the birth of the Dark Lord. I am the primordial serpent. I seek to right the wrongs of the past, to discover our true Lord. But the other serpent, Frampt, lost his sense and befriended Lord Gwyn. Undead warrior, we stand at a crossroads. Only I know the truth about your fate. You must destroy the fading Lord Gwyn, who has coddled fire and resisted nature, and become the 4th Lord, so that you may usher in an age of dark.
The meeting is very out of the way and secretive. Koth will tell the chosen undead about Frampt's lies. Frampt lied to the player about the origin of darkness. Darkness is actually closer to real-life humanity and was seen as a curse by Gwyn. Gwyn trembled at the advent of human supremacy in the face of fire-empowered beings. The Dark Soul was the equivalent of all power wielded by the dynasty of Gwyn, and our ancestor, the Furtive Pygmy, stood lone against them. Gwyn ambiguously sacrificed himself in some capacity to prevent the Dark Lord from rising. Originally, the primordial serpents were there to counsel this new Dark Lord to their place as ruler. Frampt lost his way and befriended Gwyn, and now tells lies to the undead on Gwyn's behalf. I'm gonna kill this dude, Petrus. I've had enough of him and his also obvious lying. Ha! 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 Laurentius is still chilling over there in his spot behind the rubble. Laurentius will tell the player that he'll upgrade our pyromancy if we have it, and that his master taught him that humanity has something of a hedgehog's dilemma with the power that fire grants in this world. Pyromancers are those who push past this barrier and learn to harness parts of the fire for themselves. Laurentius came to this land to learn more about fire from the birthplace of the Witch of Izalith herself. Laurentius mentions that it's not all romantic here, alluding to the chaos that has overtaken the study of pyromancy in the land of Lordran. There's the sound of a hammer swinging in the Undead Parish. Andre of Astora is another character who has a comforting presence in the story. Andre is accessible as soon as the player reaches the Undead Parish, and he'll upgrade your weapons fully, provided you can find the necessary key items to do so. Andre gives the player basic advice about weapon upgrades. He also serves as a foil to the crestfallen warrior, giving the player warnings and advice out of genuine concern for our well-being. Andre drops pretty significant lore about his immediately surrounding areas. Sen's Fortress is an old proving ground built by the old gods. Andre also knows Siegmeyer of Katarina because he's seen him sitting around the unopened Sen's Fortress gate. Well, previously previously unopened. Andre will commend Sigmayr's perseverance. Andre tells the player we can find a divine blacksmith in Darkroot Garden. A new sense of mystery has befallen the player with the path through Sen's Fortress open. Sen's Fortress is our only progress, but also the only directive available to the player is that this is the fate of the undead. The deliberately set up traps to stop the player on our way feels like they're testing our ability to survive and persevere. Sen's Fortress is a large structure built to look like a castle, but is in reality a perilous series of traps from top to bottom, designed to kill the player and anyone else who can make it that far. Chosen undead makes their way through swinging glaives on narrow walkways. About partway through the fortress, the player encounters Big Hat Logan. Logan sits behind a breakable wall in the fortress. A snake man enemy is resting against the wall, indicating there's perhaps something they're guarding there. The secret's actually really obscure and not easy to figure out, but nonetheless, forcing him to swing into the wall will break it. Logan is trapped in a cage in Sen's Fortress, captured by the snake people who man this place. The snake people are servants of the malevolent gods who built this place. Logan will request that the player frees him at risk of losing his mind in Sen's Fortress. Logan's cage is opened using either the master key or the cage key. It's not a mistake that Logan mentions his own mind here. That'll be something to keep an eye on. There's an incline that draws the eye as the player approaches the next area. A snake man gets crushed by an Indiana Jones style giant rolling boulder as you approach it. That sight is a nice rare moment of levity for such a dark game. So the player's next obstacle is to avoid these boulders, but you can also see that Sigmayr has found his way through the fortress up to this point. He's sitting at the edge of a cliff, pondering how he'll pass this boulder trap. He's still so affable, even when faced with a life-threatening problem. I love this character. The Black Sorcerer set is available to be picked up in a cell in Sen's Fortress. I like to think the explanation for this is that at class selection, the player is picking from a group of undead who take on this pilgrimage, and the one that you're playing as is the only one who finds success. The sorcerer died on this spot. There is no shortage of traps that kill the player in Sen's Fortress, one of which is the game's introduction to mimics. Mimics weren't invented in Dark Souls, but they sure as hell were popularized through it. Every so often, the player will open a chest that actually isn't a chest, but a monster that looks like a chest and get eaten. Sen's Fortress is the first of which in Dark Souls. Once the player knows what to look for, they're not challenging enemies. The player can cheat the mimics mechanics by throwing a Lloyd talisman to grab items mimics carry without having to kill them. The first half of Sen's Fortress throws these swinging glaives, rolling boulders, and snake people at you all the way up, but there is a second half to this level. Past a false fog wall, a giant starts throwing cauldron-sized firebombs at the player. You're done with those glaives that can see the open sky. Better figure out what's going on quickly though, because the player still hasn't hit a checkpoint up to this point. The open sky in this area feels false, which starts becoming more and more relevant and cyclical in the plot of Dark Souls. Player's at the top, but suddenly massive monsters seemingly have you at an impasse with the level. Player can easily pass by these giants on your first go-through because they haven't noticed you right away, but the window between their firebombs is shockingly small once they get going. This punishment is hilariously cruel for new players. The player needs to take a quick step forward up and then move at a walking pace to the right to the next bonfire checkpoint. None of these facts are apparent your first time here, meaning that the player will die and repeat the entirety of Sen's Fortress until you realize this. I purposely haven't touched on the concept of your character hollowing up to this point because it's roughly here that I can remember wondering how I was ever going to beat Sen's Fortress, let alone the whole game my first time through. I mean, it's harsh. A player wouldn't be blamed for giving up here, or, depending on your view, giving yourself a break. That dichotomy is the difference between your player hollowing out or simply stopping and coming up with a solution like Sigmayr was doing earlier. Sen's Fortress will give the player a reason to take a break their first time through. That is never a bad thing. Well, the game being overly harsh perhaps can be construed as a bad thing, don't mistake me. What isn't something you should ever apologize for is giving yourself a break when you need one. Laurentius and Andre want you to take a break. Don't make them sad. Laurentius and Andre don't want to see you go hollow, and neither do I. It's a feeling of quick mercy to finally reach that bonfire at the top of Sen's Fortress. The player doesn't have much else to do but get all the way to the top and over the wall. Those giants just keep throwing those firebombs, but suddenly the memory of opening the shortcut to Firelink Shrine connects to the bonfire at the top of Sen's. These opponents can try their hardest to keep the player down, but there's no way they can actually succeed. The player, after all, has unlimited tries, and what do they have? They've all only got one. You're the chosen undead. The forces at the top of the fortress aren't many, but they are giant. One has been dropping bolters on the player the whole time, and the other has been throwing firebombs at you. Running across some more precarious walkways feels like an action movie the way the player can feel these threats coming. And a guard tower at the end of one of the walkways is the depressed, crestfallen merchant. Most people will obviously recognize the redundancy in that previous statement. However, the word crestfallen crestfallen literally meaning depressed is something that might go over a lot of viewers' heads. The crestfallen merchant admits he's been demoralized by the challenge of Sen's Fortress and plans to live out his final days here in this tower in defeat. The merchant calls the player a bloody fool for thinking they have what it takes to overcome Sen's because it's clearly impossible. It's such a painfully candid depiction of depression, and framing it within a video game is such a uniquely human way to approach mental health. Not for all his armor and martial prowess could the Knight of Baronic, the crestfallen merchant, stop the negativity that infected his mind, and he simply stopped moving forward. He stagnated. Outwardly, the crestfallen merchant still looks hale and healthy, like he could move if he wanted to, but that's the problem. He just can't. The giants guard the boss of the area, the Iron Golem, which is visible from these locations. The Iron Golem is a mildly tricky boss for a first-time player, with landing tangential grabs with deceptive ease on you. But without killing the firebomb-throwing giant before the player fights the boss, the fight itself is impacted again by these bombs. The boss fight is dynamic. The Iron Golem fight isn't happening in an instanced location apart from the rest of the world, it's just another encounter observable by those who can see it. The encounter shouldn't sound complicated, it's not. Entering the Iron Golem's arena will have the player greeted by a firebomb by the giant behind you who throws firebombs, the one who's been annoying the player all the way up to this point. The beauty of this fact lies in its own merits, that the giant can throw these firebombs. You're going to realize that the giant can do this once, and it likely won't even kill the player instantly, but you'll wonder how much better your attempt at the boss could be going if you had just killed that giant. The chosen undead is being spoken to about the world they inhabit. Pay attention. The Iron Golem isn't a video game boss, aside from the fact that it literally is. The Golem is a massive enchanted suit of armor here to stop what is becoming an annoying, persistent little guy in a world that wants him dead. The chosen undead. This firebomb-throwing giant blurs the line between what the player feels in the video game and the intention of the developers. In other words, this giant is the immersion of the video game. The chosen undead has to kill that giant first, though. Mentally, the player is drawing connections in-game that go beyond swinging your sword until the Iron Golem is dead. That's true immersion. The actual fight is also thematically interesting. The player can summon a character called Black Iron Tarkus to fight the boss with you, supposedly the only undead known to have bested the golem and left the rest of us behind to get who knows where. Mechanically, summoning for a boss usually makes it harder. The boss's health bar scales multiplicatively for every phantom that enters the arena with the player. Iron Golem is still a fairly cinematic experience, even when the player is just watching him go one-on-one with the badass Black Iron Tarkus. It's said that this fight is canonically easier if you summon Iron Tarkus, because in-universe, Iron Tarkus is a real-life hero knight who left his summon sign as a benevolent offer to anyone who could possibly need his help. Tarkus will genuinely die to the Iron Golem given bad luck when you summon him, but the unavoidable distraction Tarkus provides to the Golem basically allows the player a free kill on it. Act fast enough and the Golem can even fall off the side of its own arena and win the fight instantly. I like this fight. The ambience is worth revisiting after you reach Anor Londo because it really hasn't changed from minute 1 of the game. Killing the Iron Golem results in a mysterious PNG appearing in the center of its arena with the prompt reading, "Touch the Ring of Light," a notably ambiguous phrasing when it was thought to be impossible to get more ambiguous. Lordran has, well, remained Lordran for the player up to this point in the game. Everything is a few hundred or so years out of repair. Everything is an insane or dead dehydrated corpse or bloated monstrosity left to its growth unchecked. Sen's Fortress changes this fact because despite being in disrepair like the rest of the world, it introduces the Snake Men. Certainly unlike anything the player has seen up to this point, but also simply a necessary video game design choice to have an enemy to populate the level. Once the player starts this cutscene, it becomes clear that your assessment was wrong, and the blurry of reality the player was feeling becomes fact. Flying, sickly white-skinned and eyeless demons snatch the player into the air and fly you somewhere else. The entryway behind the now defeated Iron Golem was, after all, tall and completely blocked. Players dropped into the land of the gods. Suddenly, the player's now familiar world of disrepair is abruptly interrupted by a camera shot of a golden, perfect-looking city of impossible scale as your characters drop into it and immediately abandoned by those weird white demons. The establishing shot being mixed in with your own perspective is a wonderful decision. Your appreciation for the view has to match your characters exactly, because the chosen undead has also been cautiously moving through the broken down ruins of the Undead Burg, Depths, and Blighttown up to reach this point. To suddenly be allowed to look at true glory and magnificence creates an ineffable sense of scale to the player that the game has already showed us at one point. But now the arrogant splendor of Anor Londo is truly allowed to be felt by the player. Sunlight is a key visual here too, because Gwyn's presence has been felt everywhere in the story but not seen. Suddenly, the sunlight symbolism is literal in Anor Londo. Gwyn might even be here for all the player knows. Now, Gwyn couldn't be here. I mean, Framted Koth told us not, but like, you know, this place feels like Gwyn is here. You know what I mean? I know you know what I mean. I know. And Frampt wasn't clear about Gwyn's whereabouts and was equally as unhelpful as any other particular subject. Frankly, neither was Koth. Chosen undead will make their way down and into the city proper. After all, there's nowhere else to go from here. The feeling of alluring mystery from Sen's fortress has grown into the central propulsion to the player's movements forward at this point. The backbone of the story is becoming more clear. The plot's breadcrumbs are becoming more frequent. That timing isn't a mistake after all. This isn't a typical story. It's a story that places absolute trust in the player to find it. That'll be something to keep in mind. The scale of Anor Londo takes on more of a thematic load upon encountering the first enemies present here. Giant sentinels guard a few chests in front of the player. Sentinels are massive warriors in full suits of armor. How expensive are these armies to field for Gwyn? The scale of the money here is impressive too. The connections don't stop. Getting into the heart of Anor Londo's intro areas, the player comes across another bonfire tended by a firekeeper. Her armor is very particular to the firekeeper. The curving of the heraldry of this character's armor gives her a uniquely feminine feeling. The school of thought in the firekeeper's design is very familiarly presented again in the Executor and Elden Ring Night Rain. The blend of feminine and masculine aspects in her armor is a great blend of developer intention and player feeling. The player immediately recognizes this firekeeper as a competent female combatant. Nothing, I repeat, is a mistake in this game, except for all the obvious mistakes. Anor Londo's great cathedral looms against the horizon for the duration of this early part of the level. The player's presence here feels almost forbidden, like Gwyn didn't think it was possible for the player to get this far. Another gargoyle stands in the player's path upon going down to the level of the cathedral we saw. It's the bell gargoyles, but appearing now as a common enemy. It feels like a presentation of the increasing player's strength, the bell gargoyles appearing again. The gargoyles got all the same attacks but uses lightning instead of fire. The area around is a dead end until you see a broken window in another cathedral off to the player's left. The city being full of cathedrals starts to make sense when you realize they aren't all cathedrals, they're all just incredibly ornate Gothic buildings with different purposes. Down below here, there's a painting that leads to another level, and the enemies are called the Painting Guardians. The Painting Guardians can backstab you and throw annoying projectiles, making the already treacherous traipse across the rafters even more dangerous. The level design of Anor Londo feels like entering every building in an unintentional way, which itself feels intentional. The entire reality of Anor Londo feels tailor-made for someone anywhere to find it. All of a sudden, the player starts forming a picture in their head here, especially if they've already spoken with Kingseeker Frampt all the way back in Firelink Shrine. Nothing is certain yet, but something is stinking in Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a detective story now. The player might not know it, but it's supposed to feel that way. What else do you think Anor Londo has to offer? On the other side of the Painting Guardian's gauntlet, there's a large statue of a goddess. The entire area has been created to accommodate Gwyn and his pantheon. These guys are all very self-absorbed, and that doesn't even really begin to describe the player's part in this story. Leaving this massive building guarding a painting, the view returns to a familiar sight. The segmented walkway leads to a massive rotating structure designed to connect this painting building and the previously centralized cathedral that was across our horizon. That's the cathedral that was the focus of the cutscene upon being flown by the demons into Anor Londo and has been occupying the player's entire sightline since starting the level. The chosen undead gets attacked by another gargoyle in this structure. He's the same as the one we just fought on the other side of the bridge. This structure now completes a walkway between where the player first found ourselves upon stepping into the sunlight and the grand central cathedral. Anor Londo is a Dark Souls 3 reference, did you know? There's a large staircase leading up to the cathedral with a central set of larger, less frequently occurring stairs meant for a larger person, in this case, the gods. To the sides of it are regular-sized stairs. Everything is all about the gods in Anor Londo. Anor Londo's splendor starts seeming much more artificial as the player encounters some more of those flying white-skinned demons in their path as they come across some rafters and up to a pair of archers. Those archers can't be understated. The archers are a more difficult version of the firebomb giants in Sen's fortress, with a smaller initial window to take advantage of before they fire their barrage of arrows at you. The player has to run up, having a full stamina bar, and bait the rightmost arrow-firing Silver Knight to draw his melee weaponry. After the player dodges the knight a few times, he usually just falls off and dies, or you'll open up a small lane between his hitbox and the wall to pass him by. This place is the official route to infiltrate Anor Londo. That's a very strange sentence, and very strange that such a thing exists. Falling down onto a balcony, Solaire is found sitting at a bonfire in the next bonfire in the level. Solaire takes the opportunity to tell you that he thinks the chosen undead has feelings for him, and laughs. Solaire is a close character to the player, and sees us as a comfort as much as we see him as one. Solaire's a great character in such an otherwise lonely world, like actual warmth and coldness. Being inside the actual rooms of the cathedral in Anor Londo is one of the loneliest feelings in the game, however. All rooms are mostly empty with the exception of the loyal soldiers of Gwyn's army, the Silver Knights. All are hostile to the player, and besides them, every room seems like it's been abandoned in a hurry. The sunlight shining brightly on everything does not match the actual sensation of anxiety of the city. No one lives here. Everything is hostile to the player. And whatever mission brought us here is feeling more and more like a smaller part in a dangerous, larger protocol. That'll be something to keep an eye on. The dissonance with characters like Solaire simply existing amidst all this ambiguity make his previous statement about The flow of time being convoluted make a lot more sense. There's a slight hedgehog's dilemma the chosen undead is in with the other characters, where their perspective would be nice, but really we can't rely on their perspective to actually help the player. That's why the summoning mechanic is so nice. Something abstract like the fighting spirit of another player being enough to tangibly affect the player's experience in their world is a great compromise. Anor Londo is a maze. Locked doors block the player from finding our way into the main hall, and we find our way up and down stairs and levels of the building to happen upon a familiar face. Sigmire of Katarina stands with his arms crossed in a side room down a staircase in the main cathedral.
Whatever can be done. Ah, you again. Let me guess. Were you repelled by the Silver Knights? Ah, don't be ashamed. 'Tis the fate of vanguards like you and I. I'll think of something. We can overcome this together. This is quite a fix. We'll need another 3, no, maybe 5 bodies. Quite a fix indeed.
Sigmire's a thoughtful character, literally standing and asking himself out loud whatever could be done about the Silver Knights that block his progress. Sigmire and the Chosen Undead stand outside a room swarming with Silver Knights. Old Sieg's quest actually can't be progressed until you kill all the Silver Knights in the adjacent room and speak with him again. Sigmire estimates another 3 to 5 warriors would be needed to take all these knights on. It's on the player to prove him wrong.
Oh ho! What's on your mind, friend? Wait! You defeated those monsters? Fantastic! I'm saved! This Knight of Katarina hereby commends you. Take this as a token of my gratitude. But be warned, gallantry entails great risks. Next time, give me a chance to come up with a plan.
Sigmire's gracious statements upon our victory betray the hint of annoyance he also has when he asks that next time, we give him some time to come up with a plan before the Chosen Undead just solves Sigmire's problems for him. The empty rooms, with the exception of Silver Knights, just keep coming. The ambience carries more of a haunted house energy as more and more of the cathedral is made manifest. Despite being abandoned, the structure otherwise remaining fully intact is a strong visual contrast to every other level in the game up to Anor Londo. Ruins forgotten by time have given way to high-class boarding and snobbish decorative taste. Portraits still line the walls to this day, carpets line the floor, and the only way in and out of rooms is through doors. Up and down and around, and the player finds a shortcut back to the room they found Solaire sitting at a bonfire in. The shortcut's in a room with the dragon heads mounted to the wall. Dragon slayers and their slain dragons are pretty common visuals in fantasy, but knowing that this cathedral is home to whoever that is a different fact altogether. In a great hall to the player's right, we can open the massive door leading back out to the gargoyles we fought. That's also where the staircase that had one large god-sized set of stairs and 2 smaller ones was. A fog gate is easily visible at the opposite end of the room. The left side of the room is more interesting at the moment because there's ostensibly an entire other half of this giant cathedral the player is in over there. The staircase runs down the walls of a square room to a giant blacksmith. The blacksmith is literally a member of the same race of giants, like the giant that threw firebombs at the player before the Iron Golem, but is non-hostile and will forge the player's weapons. The giant only has a few lines and mentions that he doesn't like to talk, but comes across as surprisingly patient. NPCs in Dark Souls will react to the player repeatedly hitting the talk prompt as if you're repeatedly seeking their attention, and some NPCs will get annoyed when you do this. The giant blacksmith doesn't, though. The giant just says that he's happy with your arrangement the way it is, with the player feeling comfortable enough with him to talk while he just remains silent. One of the critical details of Lautrec of Karim's quest is that upon entering the Great Hall in Anor Londo is that the quest ends in this hall. The black eye orb the player picked up from Anastasia of Stor's corpse upon finding her dead at Firelink Shrine quivers in our inventory. The orb allows the player to invade the world of the guilty. We invade Lautrec's world as a phantom to find he has 2 additional white phantoms to guard him. Lautrec's not very forthright about his goals, but he's trying to prevent any undead from seeing the quest all the way through. Lautrec's resistance will become more and more relevant as the game progresses. He greets the player with the same villainous cackling demeanor and starts a 3v1 with him and his phantoms versus the player. Lautrec will even recognize repeated attempts if the player dies on the first first one. To win the encounter, Lautrec just needs to be killed, and he'll drop a Firekeeper soul. The player can mistakenly upgrade the Estus Flask with it, but you should use it back at Firelink Shrine. The player will once they get back there, but for now, we've got a Dragon Slayer to slay. Approaching the fog gate in the main hall, it becomes clear that this hall leads to the centralized heart of the cathedral. Inside, a cutscene plays of what appears to be a morbidly obese man wielding a hammer that would require massive strength to make use of, and a smaller armored man with a spear. The morbidly obese man in reality is actually just a large man wearing armor that makes him look that way, and the smaller man is the Dragon Slayer. These men form the duo of Ornstein and Smo, and they're the next boss. The second major gank fight, Ornstein and Smo have become notorious as the hardest boss in the game, but in reality, they operate under the same principles as the Bell Gargoyles. The player can't ignore their stamina consumption, but if you pay close attention to it, the fight is mostly just waiting for the small openings that do present themselves between Ornstein and Smo's attack barrages. Finding yourself at the central point of worship in the cathedral feels like the player is stepping directly into the heart of the Gwyn cult. Gwyn statues on the walls, the marble is designed to reflect maximum sunlight, and the permanent sunset of Anor Londo is the only light through the yellow stained glass windows. The warriors that oppose the player are devout in their faith to Gwyn. There's no shortage of Gwyn to go around when you're in Gwyn's house. No accounting for taste, I guess, even when that taste is worshipping yourself. Dragonslayer Ornstein is one of Gwyn's 4 knight captains, and Smo is the royal executioner. Smo is characterized through his armor description as a true psychopath, and Ornstein can be deduced to dislike Smo, but work with him out of duty to Gwyn anyway. These guys are all pretty weird. The strong opposition that Ornstein and Smo pose is still no joke though, and their reputation as the hardest boss in Dark Souls has been well earned, and it wasn't until Elden Ring that public opinion switched over to Millennia as the hardest boss the series has to offer. Killing Ornstein first will result in a cutscene playing where Smo aggressively smashes Ornstein's corpse and steals what remains of his soul to give himself a further edge in combat against the Chosen. Killing Smo first results in a cutscene playing where Ornstein respectfully approaches Smo's corpse and siphons its energy for himself for the rest of the battle. It's these little things that tell you about the kind of characters Ornstein and Smo are. But again, none of this information in Dark Souls is conveyed through dialogue. These implied story beats are a sign of respect towards the player. The player not only has it within them to overcome the challenging bosses, but also to grasp the small details of the story as they happen. That dynamic is a vision of a video game centered around trusting and respecting the player. The theme of Ornstein and Smo is again a highly operatic song, there to contrast the ever-present ambiance of everything else. Horns are more pronounced in the small opera Motoi Sakuraba composed the theme from, and makes this song stand out in the soundtrack from the typically choir-heavy pieces. A viewer isn't really going to notice the strong theater of Dark Souls until you've played it countless times and write an essay on it, because you're part of it your first time through. Upon beating Ornstein and Smo, there's an elevator to take up to the second level. Suddenly, Guinevere, a large, kind woman, greets the player in her chamber just above the room you fought Ornstein and Smo for your life in. Guinevere is here to congratulate you on a job well done.
O chosen undead, I am Guinevere, daughter of Lord Gwyn and Queen of Sunlight. Since the day Father his wounded obscureth, I have awaited thee. I bequeath the Lord vessel to thee, and beseech thee, succeed Lord Gwyn, and inheriteth the fire of our world. Thou shalt endeth this eternal twilight, and avert further undead sacrifices. O chosen undead, thou hast journeyed far. Since the day Father his wounded obscureth, I have awaited thee, once living, now undead, and a fitting heir to Father Gwyn thou art. O chosen undead, and beseech thee, succeed Lord Gwyn, and inheriteth the fire of our world, a grave and arduous test of mental, yea, it shall be. Indeed, we had felt the warmth of fire, its radiance and the life it sustaineth. Without fire, all shall be a frigid and frightful dark. Please, Father's role thou shouldst heal, and inheriteth the fire of our world. Thou shalt endeth this eternal twilight, and avert further undead sacrifices. Kingseeker Friend, the primordial serpent, shall guide thee. Now thou shalt go forth, chosen undead. May thou be one with the sunlight forevermore.
Guinevere's been testing the undead to see if there was one worthy of succeeding her father Gwyn, whom she, his daughter, has been ruling in place as the Queen of Sunlight. Gwyn, according to Guinevere, is nowhere to be seen, because he went off to ensure that the first flame remained lit. Okay, so Guinevere is also not trustworthy. Literally no one will tell us what the actual journey's end of the Chosen Undead's quest is. Guinevere grants the Chosen Undead the Lord Vessel, a magic bowl. The player can use it, based on its description, to succeed Lord Gwyn with the correct and powerful souls. The Lord Vessel acquisition is also when the player finally gets to drop the training weights and show Gara your true speed, if you will. The Lord Vessel grants the power to warp between bonfires. The undead will never need to spend 10 to 15 minutes running from one end of the map to the other again. While it feels a bit like a welcome but superficial treat at first, the ability to warp between bonfires is actually a necessity connected to the design of the game changing once again from this juncture onward in Dark Souls' story. Again, that information is all very cool and abstract, but where even is Gwyn? Well, Gwyn's in the land down under, but the player first needs to find some powerful souls to fill our magic bowl, the Lord Vessel, first. But also, Anor Londo has left the wool pulled over the Chosen Undead's eyes for too long.
Thou that tarnisheth the Godmother's image, I am Gwyndolin. And thy transgression shall not go unpunished. Thou shalt perish in the twilight of Anor Londo.
The entire level is an illusion created to maintain an image of a holy pilgrimage an undead is lucky enough to participate in to the homeland of Gwyn. Guinevere disappears before the Chosen Undead's eyes as a cutscene plays, and Gwyndolin's voice informs the player that we shall perish in the twilight of Anor Londo. Turns out that the sunlight in Anor Londo really was just one big fluorescent light in the sky designed to look and operate like a perpetual sunset, because it does literally go out. The entirety of Anor Londo goes dark, and suddenly the real Anor Londo feels a lot more hostile than the one we've seen up to this point. Not only is the area dark, but the large sentinels the players fought up to this point were also illusions. Gwyndolin is the new boss of the area, and she's also another child of Gwyn. Gwyndolin's boss fight is a ways past the Chosen Undead and is currently in Anor Londo, and creates an interesting problem for the Chosen Undead. Gwyndolin was born with the symbol of the moon to Gwyn, which reflects the notion that in a lot of Western mythologies the sun is masculine while the moon is feminine. So Gwyn raised Gwyndolin as a woman, making Gwyndolin Dark Souls' resident trans woman. The Firekeeper the player encountered on their way in is also connected to Gwyndolin. The Keeper wasn't an illusion, she was there to greet any undead who made it as far as Anor Londo to give Anor Londo a realer feel.
So it was you, was it? How dare you produce a blade upon a deity? How did you ever get this far? I shall end your suffering here and now.
In actuality, the Armored Firekeeper is actually a member of Gwyndolin's Blades of the Dark Moon. The Firekeeper attacks the player as soon as we exit the main cathedral and questions our capacity to have even made it this far. It's genuinely unbelievable to be as blasphemous as the Chosen Undead has chosen themselves to be and also have progressed this far in the fake questline Gwendolin set up for the Chosen Undead to follow. The gods are finally taking real notice of the Chosen Undead's presence. And there wasn't a giant target pointing at Guinevere, that was just something the Chosen Undead had to deduce for themselves. It's finally time to start making plays for ourselves. Gwendolin shouldn't have let the undead get this far. The Firekeeper even recognizes the undead as a threat upon death. Too little, too late, though. The Chosen Undead is already down the stairs and passing through Gwendolin's boss fight.
Heretic. First thou offendeth the Godmother, and now thou see fit to trample upon the tomb of the great Lord. I am the dark sun, Gwyndolin. Let the atonement for thy felonies commenceth.
This area is the tomb of Gwyn, who is presumed dead after having left for the First Flame. Gwendolyn is still pissed about Guinevere, and gets even angrier when the player decides that it's chill for the chosen undead to head on down to Gwyn's old tomb. Gwyn's tomb also serves as the boss arena for Gwendolyn, who creates an illusion of a never-ending hallway for the player to chase her down. Gwendolyn has a limited moveset with 2 magic attacks and a rapid-fire crossbow. That's also a Berserk reference. Guts and stuff is all over Dark Souls. If you don't like Berserk, you probably aren't going to like Dark Souls. This isn't the last time I'll be drawing on this comparison either. Gwendolyn's main gimmick is disappearing after the chosen undead gets too close to her, so make the most of the small windows when you're right next to Gwendolyn and she'll die after a few exchanges.
Swathed in dark, an eternal curse upon thee.
Gwyn's tomb is a massive rectangular prism, strangely. The chosen undead can find the brass armor set in here, the set worn by Anor Londo's armored firekeeper. The armor's description adds to the game that the firekeeper had a hideous form she used this armor to hide. I infer that this fact is because of the firekeeper's proximity to fire. She's been burned. The alliance the firekeeper had with Gwendolyn as one of the Blades of the Dark Moon feels tragic, as Gwendolyn only had use of this keeper's martial prowess and nothing more. And this minor acknowledgement in Gwendolyn's eyes was enough to make a home of Anor Londo for the Firekeeper. Firekeeper therefore devoted her entire life to protecting Gwendolyn. There's a solid gathering at Firelink Shrine after all this drama, with Siegmeyer taking a breather at the bonfire and Anastasia of Astora coming back to life, thanks to the chosen undead. Siegmeyer is at the shrine to note the player's opening of Sen's Fortress's gate for him, which didn't occur to Siegmeyer until he witnessed the chosen undead saving him from the Silver Knights in Anor Londo. Siegmeyer tells the player he'll be heading down below, wherever that is. The news sounds bad. Comfort that Siegmeyer gives me feels threatened. It's time to keep the story moving and see where Siegmeyer ends up. Now the chosen undead has a choice. The Lord Vessel needs to be placed in Gwyn's prison, and the player can pick 2 cutscenes to get you there. Koth will take you to the prison and so will Frampt, but the player can't be friends with both primordial serpents. One will accuse you of betrayal and disappear forever if you side with the other. The Firelink altar sits below Firelink Shrine, and now the chosen undead knows that Gwyn is right below their feet. The player needs to find the necessary keys to open the door to Gwyn now, and that means finding the other 4 Lord Souls. The intro cutscene spoke about 3 of the owners: the Witch of Izalith, Gravelord Nito, and Seath the Scaleless. 3 owners, the Witch of Izalith, Gravelord Nito, and Seath the Scaleless. Curious. The Crestfallen Warrior in his hallowed state attacks the chosen undead at this point in the entry to New Londo Ruins. The Crestfallen Warrior has completely hollowed out at this point, and through inference has taken refuge underneath Firelink Shrine, away from the smell of Kingseeker Frampt. The theme of this encounter is the multiple layers of dramatic irony. The player knows that Frampt's story itself is untrustworthy and stinks, but the Crestfallen Warrior is literally driven insane by the stench of Frampt's presence, so it must be a genuinely putrid aroma. The Crestfallen Warrior won't be tearing down fresh-faced undeads within seconds of meeting them anymore. Placing the Lord Vessel plays a cutscene unveiling the location of each of these remaining Lord Souls. Lord Ren still has a few nooks and crannies to search first. Climbing up to the top of Firelink Shrine, the player can find a crow's nest with a prompt associated with it. Curling up into a ball and waiting for 10 seconds, another cutscene will play. The chosen undead is picked back up by the crow who originally took us away from the Undead Asylum. The crow drops the player back off at the asylum for round 2. The asylum is more or less the same since the last time the chosen undead was here. A few torch-wielding hollows will give you a hard time on your way in, and the player can run yourself back to the original bonfire. Oscar of Astora is hollowed out in here too. The chosen undead can take a look around the old stomping grounds and run all the way back to their original home, the cell. A surprising and frightening sight greets the chosen undead as they turn that corner though. Londo. Another Black Knight now stands guard in front of the player's old cell. Black Knights are specters of Gwyn's Silver Knights who lost a battle against the Chaos and had their armor charred black. These specters now wander the land aimlessly, slaughtering all who stand in their way. One duel later, the chosen undead will find the peculiar doll in the self-same cell that Dark Souls started in. A strange abomination calls out to us from somewhere to return it. The peculiar doll is actually a key to the painted world of AriandelMis. The painting back in Anor Londo sticks out like a sore thumb, and approaching it after warping back to Anor Londo gives the player a prompt when approaching the painting. A cutscene plays then of the chosen undead being grabbed and sucked into the painting, Mario 64 style. The painted world is a snowy copse filled with enemies who see the chosen undead as an invader. Diseased, sickly hollows and horrifically mutated amalgamations of flesh will attack the chosen undead at every turn, and the landscape is ruinous. But a home those who live here call it nonetheless. The chosen undead's pillaging and rampage through the painted world of AriandelMis continues until a door blocks the player's path. Somewhere around is a secret mechanism to activate to open the door and find our way to the back. A rickety walkway leads the player from one tall structure to another. Another Knight of Baronic blocks the player's path. Those guys look so cool, but they're not worth fighting. Also of note within the painted world are the two Demon Souls references, one being a pyromancy invader named King Jeremiah who wears the same clothes as the old monk from Demon Souls. Jeremiah has a giant head that resembles a chicken drumstick. Also there's the Phalanx at the center of the arena, which resembles the Phalanx from Demon Souls. The boss of the area is Crossbreed Priscilla. Crossbreed Priscilla doesn't attack the player upon entering her arena, however. The peculiar doll all of a sudden connects to Priscilla and the chosen undead's head.
One of us thou art not. If thou hast misstepped into this world, plunge down from the plank and hurry home. If thou seekest I, thine desires shall be requited not. Thou must return it whence thou came. This land is peaceful, its inhabitants kind, but thou dost not belong. I beg of thee, plunge down from the plank and hurry home.
Crossbreed Priscilla, using clear suggestions through her name and appearance, is part dragon. Priscilla's scaleless tail also heavily implies that Seath is her father. Furthermore, Priscilla being described as an abomination with no place in the world, in the peculiar doll item description tells the player that this painted world was created as her prison to hide her away from the world. Apparently Gwyn's dynasty didn't draw the line at violent discriminatory practices against its own citizens, even when they were royalty. Priscilla asks that the player simply leave when you meet her. Attacking Priscilla is entirely up to the player because the chosen undead can jump off the exit to her arena and find yourself back in Anor Londo. For the purpose of the video, I recorded the boss fight. Priscilla's main gimmick is that she can become invisible during the fight, and the player has to track her based on her footprints in the snow. Priscilla doesn't have a high health pool and isn't that challenging outside of that mechanic. Chosen undead will plunge off the plank at the back of Priscilla's arena, having spared or killed her. The player will be back in the Painting Cathedral surrounded by painting guardians, having completed that little adventure in the painted world of AriandelMis, which the chosen undead now knows as the sad prison imposed upon a member of Gwyn's royalty out of fear for what she was. Picture of Gwyn as a cowardly despot is clear at this point. Laurentius is still hanging out at Firelink Shrine and trades with the chosen undead the same as always. Leveling up your pyromancy flame to +10 officially makes the chosen undead an advanced pyromancer. Kalana of Izalith is now visible in Blighttown.
A mere undead, yet you can see me. Fascinating. I am Quelana of Izalith. I am not often revealed to walkers of flesh. You have a gift. Are you too one who seeks my pyromancy, like Salomon? Yes, of course. It should be expected. Very well. You shall be my pupil, but to pursue my pyromancy, you must give something up. Are you prepared to do this?
Kalana tells the player her name and that she is one of the original circle of the Witches of Izalith. Kalana will upgrade the Chosen Undead's pyromancy, but her quest can only be progressed upon purchasing all pyromancy she has available. Kalana preaches a healthy fear of the flame and pyromancy, lest the flame consume its user. She preaches the same lesson Laurentius once taught the undead. It's almost like she speaks from experience on the subject, and so does Laurentius. Returning and telling Laurentius about Kalana will result in Laurentius descending to Blighttown.
Oh, hello there. You've been a stranger these days. Why? What's spectacular pyromancy? Tell me about it. I have never seen anything like it. Why, yes, of course. Thank you for sharing. I'm still an able pyromancer. I shall locate her myself. I'm in your debt, once again.
Laurentius is impressed that the Chosen Undead somehow managed to surpass him in terms of pyromancy. Following Laurentius down after some time will find him hollowed out. Laurentius was devastated that he couldn't find Kalana, as in order to find her, the user must be at a certain level of pyromancy. Laurentius' only purpose was denied to him, and now he's hollow. The Chosen Undead must put him out of his misery in a tragic end to Laurentius' tale.
And pretending to seek answers. I have a favor to ask. My mother, the Witch of Izalith, was one of the primeval lords. Her power came from the soul that she found near the first flame. She focused this power to light a flame of her own. But she failed to control it. The flame of chaos engulfed Mother and my sisters and molded them into deformed creatures. Only I escaped. And now I am here. But my mother and sisters have been in anguish since. I beseech you, free Mother and my sisters from the flame of chaos. I cannot do it myself. I lack the strength and the bravery. But you, I realize what I am asking. But please, free their poor souls. Mother's ambitions were misguided, no doubt. But surely 1,000 years of atonement is enough.
Almost cruelly, Kalana will pass on forgotten and forbidden pyromancy information to the player after completing this stage in Laurentius' quest. The Chosen Undead is charged with Kalana's secret purpose of finding and stopping Kalana's mother, the Witch of Izalith. Kalana thinks now that the Chosen Undead is a capable enough pyromancer to undertake this task. Kalana feels responsibility to the rest of her family to free them from the control of the flame of chaos. Kalana feels responsibility to the rest of her family to free them from the control of the flame of chaos. If Laurentius was strong enough of a pyromancer and he reached Kalana before the player, it would have been Laurentius who was charged with this task instead of the Chosen Undead. That'll be something. Siegmeyer has made a pit stop near Kalana as well. He's headed further below and has fallen short on the cure to the poison that is found all over Blighttown.
Oh ho! Excuse me, I was so absorbed in thought I just drifted away. You see, I'm actually in a bit of a fix. I've made it this far, but I'm short on antidote moss for the trip back. By my knighthood, I'm ashamed to ask, but can you spare a few scraps of moss? Fantastic! Thank you. A saint you are. This Knight of Katarina expresses his deepest gratitude. I shall not forget this. Please, take this, the symbol of my appreciation. Well, our fates do seem entwined, don't they? Perhaps this, too, is the will of Lord Gwyn. The poison swamp, like quicksand in there.
Chosen Undead has a choice to give Siegmeyer some more. Siegmeyer has no choice here. He's taking another hit to his pride. That's the last the Chosen Undead will see of Siegmeyer in Blighttown. Something in Blighttown has become too large to continue ignoring. Climbing up a route at the far side of Blighttown's swamp, the Chosen Undead finds themselves inside of the Great Hollow. A massive hollow tree with roots large enough to act as platforms to drop onto and descend lower and lower to an unknown destination. Whatever is down at the bottom there has to be good for something so out of the way. Lower and lower, and the brown roots give way to red fungi. The Chosen Undead has ventured so far down, there's no way any light from the surface could possibly reach down here. And yet, through a fog gate, the Chosen Undead finds an impossible underground space. Ash Lake hits the player like no other area in Dark Souls could possibly hit. As soon as the title card for Ash Lake disappears, male choir blasts onto the soundtrack in a long, deep bass note. No other area in Dark Souls outside of Firelink Shrine has had its own soundtrack, and so the anxiety that another boss fight is about to ensue hits hard. And yet, nothing. The player can find their way over to a bonfire, or you can fight the Hydra enemy that swims out in the waters, but the player's only obligation is to absorb the sights and sounds immediately surrounding them. Far into the horizon is a still ocean as far as the eye can see, and arch trees passing out of sight into the sky. Ash Lake is the primordial underground location seen in the intro to Dark Souls. Ash Lake is a barren and forgotten place now, but not for Siegmeyer. Ash Lake is a long level from a horizontal standpoint, and trudging all the way to the end concludes with another interesting sight. It's an everlasting dragon, which were thought to be extinct. The everlasting dragon is actually totally passive and is a joinable covenant for the chosen undead. Also, the dragon's tail has a health bar. If the chosen undead destroys it, you get the dragon greatsword. The everlasting dragon still doesn't attack. All in all, the area and sights on their own merits and the dragon are the extent of the experience of Ash Lake. Ash Lake is just an extra zone for the dedicated player who scours the entire game world for everything it has to offer. A few hidden walls need to be passed, but Ash Lake, despite being entirely optional, is actually a critically important area to Dark Souls lore. Speaking of the history of the world of Dark Souls, in Darkroot Garden, the sub-area called the Basin houses a Hydra. The Hydra doesn't have a health bar and stands out only on the virtue of its own existence, but killing it will cause a new NPC to appear. Dusk of Ulasil comes from a time long past.
So, 'tis thou who rescuest me. Most gracious, I am deeply obliged. I am Dusk of Ulasil. I cometh from an age long before thine. I cannot stay here for long. So, before I disappear, allow me to ask one thing. My home, Ulasil, is the home of ancient sorceries. My hope is to pass this profound knowledge to thee, with thine approval. Would this be of assistance to thee? My heartfelt thanks. I am pleased beyond words. Then I shout, engrave my signature. If thou art in need, pray summon me from my signature. It seems that my time is done. May the great flames guide thee.
Dusk's own words to the chosen undead. Finding Dusk in this way is a really obscure start to the quest leading to the DLC of Dark Souls, Artorias of the Abyss, which I consider a necessary expansion of the story of Dark Souls. There's a final step to Dusk's quest which involves picking up a broken pendant from her time in one of the next levels of the base game of Dark Souls, the Duke's Archives. It's also an obtuse and roundabout step to this quest. Once you get that pendant, you can start the DLC, Artorias of the Abyss. Cutscene is a giant, pustule-covered arm grabbing you out of a portal in the Darkroot Basin. The arm drops you off in the past in Ulasil, where the chosen undead is immediately treated to a bonfire and then the next boss. The Sanctuary Guardian is an enemy that matches traditional depictions in fantasy of a chimera, parts of different creatures making a whole new one. The Sanctuary Guardian has aspects of an eagle, a lion, a scorpion, and a horse. The item description for the Sanctuary Guardian's soul states that it's closer to demons than any other creature, as characterized by the Guardian's chimera-like nature. These various aspects of the creature make the Sanctuary Guardian a dynamic fight. The player has to watch out for a poison status effect from the tail, aerial attacks from its wings, and speedy maulings from the lion and horse body. The speed of the Sanctuary Guardian feels a lot more like a frantic struggle for the advantage with easily the fastest attacks in the game. The Sanctuary Guardian boss fight sets the tone for the Dark Souls DLC, which is in my opinion easily the most difficult content in the game. Another effect of the Dark Souls DLC fights is that each one feels a lot more like an action set piece. The cinematic flair of each boss fight cannot be understated and still stand as some of the best boss fights the series has to offer to this day. Speaking of set pieces, the past Ulasil shares the same land that Darkroot Garden does in the Chosen Undead's world. The difference is the same forest is in broad daylight with fully visible vegetation and open patches of earth still around us. Greens and browns all around, giving the Royal Wood a comfortable and welcoming feeling. Comfortable and welcoming feeling initially anyways, before you get to the enemies. Those guys aren't that comfortable and welcoming. Elizabeth is a talking mushroom and godmother to Dusk of Ulasil.
Look at this one. From what faraway age hast thou come? Thy scent is very human indeed, but not intolerable. Ah, Princess Dusk's savior. Thine aura is precisely as she described. I thank thee deeply for rescuing Her Highness, but Princess Dusk is here no longer. snatched away by that horrifying primeval human. And so I must ask, couldst thou once more play the saviour? Thank you. I am Elizabeth, guardian of this sanctuary. Something of a godmother to Princess Dusk. I shall assist thee to my utmost, for I am one with the sorceries of Oolacile. Thou shalt see further on, an abyss was begat of the ancient beast, and threatens to swallow the whole of Oolacile. Knight Artorias came to stop this, but such a hero has nary a murmur of dark. Without doubt he will be swallowed by the abyss, overcome by its utter blackness. Indeed, the abyss may be unstoppable. Still, I have faith that Princess Dusk may be rescued yet.
Elizabeth will greet the Chosen Undead as Dusk's savior. At this point, the Chosen Undead may have summoned Dusk for help against the Hydra and will definitely have been charged with the defense of her land from the Abyss, so Elizabeth is going to recognize the player. Elizabeth tells the player that Dusk has been snatched away by a horrifying primeval human. Was that the same hand that snatched the Chosen Undead to begin the DLC? That'll be something to keep an eye on. A battle against the Abyss is currently being fought by Gwyn's Knight Artorias, just ahead of the Chosen Undead, according to Elizabeth. But Elizabeth's account of Artorias is different from the knowledge passed to this player henceforth to this point. Artorias is getting stomped by the Abyss during this very conversation. It's up to the Chosen Undead to banish the Abyss in Artorias' place. Sure enough, the Royal Wood's healthy vegetation and land begins giving way to pitch-black craters with no visible bottom segmenting the land. Totally inside the free control of the player's camera, another dragon nearly crushes the Chosen Undead as they attempt to cross a bridge. The dragon peers at the player indifferently before it once again takes to the skies and flies out of sight. This encounter is a callback to the Hellkite Drake back in Undead Burg, but the player is intended to be taken by the majesty of this dragon. This dragon is a four-legged beast with wings and a pulsing crimson jewel at the center of its head. This beast is far more dangerous than the one in the Undead Burg. This incident sits in the player's mind until the story of this dragon is told properly. That lingering emotion is because the player is allowed to control the entire encounter. A large coliseum sits in front of the Chosen Undead at the edge of the Royal Wood. This battleground is absolutely the coordinates of the next boss encounter, but curiously, an NPC nearby references Knight Artorias. The NPC introduces himself as Marvelous Chester, another time traveler brought to Oolacile by a shadowy arm. Marvelous Chester is an untrustworthy fellow. Every line seems loaded with some kind of mockery for the Chosen Undead, despite finding himself in the same situation as the Chosen Undead. Chester isn't helpful outside of trading and warning the player that Artorias is likely not in his right mind. Chester's dialogue is untrustworthy like many other characters, with pieces of useful information undercut by cruel laughter as if the players would be fools to trust anything the man says. A nearby path down leads to a small dry riverbed and another separate boss door. That boss fog leads to Calamite and our immediate death! The dragon doesn't even give the player a chance. The entire arena is enveloped in black flame without the boss even coming close to within the player's range. Well, nothing to do when there's nothing to do. Artorias' intro cutscene plays, and wouldn't you be surprised? I know I am surprised. Artorias has lost his mind and he looks like this. Artorias is introduced to the player by his official title, Knight Artorias. Artorias is a fast, roughly player-sized boss who attacks mostly with his greatsword. The fight is supposed to invoke the feeling of a duel. The Chosen Undead and Artorias meet in the center of a coliseum, with Artorias as a minion of the Abyss that he came to stop. The tales of Lordran about Artorias being the hero that saved Gwyn's kingdom from the Abyss aren't true. And suddenly, the real hero in the story becomes much clearer. Artorias' attacks are fast slashing combos with his sword, requiring precise dodging in specific directions. Artorias was such a popular boss among players and fans, he became a formulaic template for the Knight-type bipedal bosses for years in the franchise. The discussions of these fights have divisive qualities, but the Artorias boss fight itself is an amazing template to build off of. The Sanctuary Guardian was fast, but it was still just a beast. Artorias presents the player with an opponent who mirrors them. and attacks us like we're just another beast to Artorias. The boss fight has an incredibly dynamic feel. The encounter is two warriors fighting simply for the right to continue existing in the world. Artorias is one of 3 bosses with a voice actor, the other 2 being Dark Sun Gwendolyn and Crossbreed Priscilla. Artorias doesn't have any lines of dialogue except for the pained moans he makes to send some cut lines. The Chosen Undead's final slaying of Artorias is a mercy kill. Ulyssil Township lies beyond Artorias. Resting at the bonfire and returning to the spot where Artorias was slain by the Chosen Undead's hand, the player is greeted by the Lord's Blade Kieran. Kieran mourns at a small grave she has erected on the spot and asks the Chosen Undead to return the soul of Artorias to her.
You, is that not the soul of the man who fell on this spot? He was a dear friend. I wish to pay proper respect with that soul. Would you be willing to part with it? Thank you. You are very kind. Please take this. I no longer need it. May the Lord guide thee.
A small token for Kieran to put to rest her dearest friend she was helpless to heal after Artorias was consumed by the Abyss. Kieran is thankful to the Undead for their help in defeating Artorias and asks that the Chosen Undead now leave her to mourn. That's easy enough, see ya. That encounter spells the meeting with the 3rd Night of Gwyn, and now there's just one more. Up the stairs of the Colosseum is a locked door opened with the crest key. Hawkeye Goff sits there in peaceful solitude carving his archtree stones. Goff's an easygoing, affable fellow who's content to participate in the fall of Ulyssil, carving his days away until the world ends.
Yes, I thought as much. He's called Calamite, ferocious dragon indeed. Even mighty Anor Londo dared not provoke his ire. I see little good coming from this, but my intent is to persevere to the bitter end. Good, good. What is bravery without a dash of recklessness? I've taken a liking to thee, and I owe thee much for thy service to Artorias. Now, watch, and see how Goff hunts dragons. Yes, a truer shot was never loosed. That bat will be grounded for a good spell. The rest is in thine hands. I await good tidings. Dragon slaying, knighthood's highest calling. Hello there. What of Calamite? He is an ancient dragon. Skyward or no, he will not be put down easily. Dragons shall never be forgotten. We knights fought valiantly, but for every one of them, we lost 80 of our own. Exhilaration, pride, hatred, rage. The dragons teased out our dearest emotions. Thou will understand one day. At thy twilight, old thoughts return in great waves of nostalgia. I suspect thou hast taken a gander at it, but the dark of the abyss who swallowed poor Artorias, threatens to devour our entire land of Ulasil. It seems that this dire fate is unavoidable, but seduced by a dark serpent or no, they awoke that thing themselves and drove it mad. One's demise is always one's own making. If thy wish is to succeed poor Artorias and challenge the spread of the dark, then thou must face Manus, father of the abyss. The dark emanates from Manus himself. Even if this land shall expire, thou may be able to prevent further corrosion. But even so, one day the flames will fade, and only dark will remain, and even a legend such as thyself can do nothing to stop that. Now, do not mistake my words. I cherish my work. Wood carving is a nuanced art. I would have much to talk about with that blacksmith. In truth, how is the old chap, I wonder? Still hammering away, I should hope. Farewell, human. I await good tidings.
Goff's also a giant blind archer. However, Goff is impressed by the chosen undead's determination to slay the black dragon Calamite. The most badass sequence in any Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro, or otherwise follows this conversation. Goff is the man. Goff is the damn man. Of course, the man Goff caps his shot off with, "A truer shot was never loosed." What a man. So manly. The onus is now on the chosen undead to make the most of Goff's legendary assist to the player. Artorias' gratitude goes a long way in these parts. Goff's days fighting for the Empire of Gwyn are over and he simply wishes to do the right thing. Calamite's encounter is now reduced to a beatable state. The dragon has a high health pool and large, sweeping tail and claw-bound hitboxes. Calamite isn't one of the harder dragon boss fights, but he is one of the best simply by virtue of his size and attack animations. Calamite can actually be fought locked on, which isn't really the case for most of the legendary dragon boss fights in From Software games going forward. The player shouldn't ever really lock on to the dragons that FromSoft games would become famous for, with the exception of a few specific attacks. Calamite's fight has a more dynamic nature that's also underlined by his theme, a synthesized organ piece more gothic than any music that's come before. The music of the Dark Souls DLC all stands out from the base game because each boss's theme is unique. Calamite's coolest attack is his grab, where the crimson jewel in the center of his head magically lifts you into the air in a grab attack. The attack doesn't do much damage, but it does come with a cool high-pitched ringing sound effect and leaves the player with a status effect. The status effect is that the chosen undead now takes double damage for the remainder of the Calamite boss fight, making this attack very unique in the scheme of boss fights in Dark Souls. The grab attack only works if other moves in Calamite's moveset also connect, meaning that the dynamic aspect of the boss fight finds itself in Calamite's combination of moves complementing one another. This dynamic would start becoming common in later FromSoft Souls series, but this grab attack was somewhat novel at the time of Dark Souls. Even the final boss of this DLC has a unique mechanic associated with certain attack patterns. Ulasil's affliction with the Abyss runs deep, very deep. Taking the treacherous path down across leveled buildings in Ulasil Township shows the chosen undead just how deep. Through the dungeons of Ulasil Township, a massive underground cavern becomes the player's next stage. Corrupted sorcerers and living humanity sprites become the enemies to fight. As the player approached this location, moss-like black corruption spread across the walls and indicated the approaching origin point of Ulasil's trouble with the Abyss. The cavern is lit only by the immediately granted automatic lighting attached to our character's model. Humanity, up to this point, has been a central game mechanic in Dark Souls, explained in the item description. The black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, and what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves? The philosophical musing within the item description is elaborated on by the enemies the player finds in the impact crater that is the Chasm of the Abyss. The hostile humanities are themselves the humanity that the Abyss brings with it, and also the catalyst for Ulasil's destruction. The Abyss swallows up the residents of Ulasil and converts them to their most basic elements, their humanity, adding to the Abyss's collective. It's just like the Burg from Star Trek. Don't make me make a video about Star Trek. Down below, in one of the deepest parts of the Chasm of the Abyss, is a dog. That's a lie, this dog is actually a wolf. The wolf dog is Sif, Knight Artorias' loyal compatriot. Sif sits in mid-humanities, protected by a runic circle of golden magic and wielding Artorias' greatsword. This sword will be used to fight the player once again, but Sif is just thankful that the player came to her rescue as she howls mournfully and flees. Sif leaves behind Artorias' great shield, which states that the shield was used at the expense of Artorias' arm to protect Sif from a powerful blast of energy from an unknown abyssal creature. That bit of heroism is what led to Artorias only having one functioning arm during his fight with the Chosen Undead. Artorias' companion is only a herald of what remains for the Chosen Undead to find deeper in the chasm of the abyss. Another fog gate is a new cutscene for the player to sit back and watch. The same arm that started the ordeal of the Dark Souls DLC once again grabs the entire body of the player and draws us down to a flat expanse of cave. The first thing to emerge from the darkness are angry red lights anomalously grouped into a bunch. Soon, the entire form of the approaching monstrosity is revealed. The totally demonic visage of the being known as Manus, Father of the Abyss, greets the Chosen Undead. Wielding a staff as a weapon like a human would, but with an opposite arm asymmetrically long and with modal darkness surrounding it. Bent posture and antlers that look too heavy for its own body, the creature nonetheless attacks with unbelievable speed, power, and ferocity. Manus' boss music is fairly generic for such an important inflection point in the history of the story of Dark Souls. The music holds the same candle to your journey that most other themes do, giving the encounter a grandiose individual segment in your ambient journey. The encounter with Manus doesn't want the player to confuse it for anything other than what it is, a pivotal fight with the creature passed into legend in the time of the Chosen Undead originally came from. Who is Manus? Where's the Dark Lord that Kath warned the undead about? That'll be something to keep an eye on. Manus sometimes shoots magic black blasts at you, which can be totally negated with the Silver Pendant, an item from earlier in Ulasil Township. The Silver Pendant only works on these attacks, and the pendant also has a healthy startup time, giving the player that same feeling of timing that all the interactions in Dark Souls have trained the player to expect up to this point. Upon defeat, Manus drops Dusk of Ulasil. The reality is as ridiculous as it sounds. The NPC Dusk of Ulasil literally falls out of Manus' body when his health bar hits 0. Dusk seems like she's beyond the player's help at this point, so the DLC of Dark Souls ends on a bittersweet note of the Chosen Undead saving Ulasil from a general of the Abyss, being forced to slay Artorias in the process, stealing his legacy in the process, but also being forgotten to history and creating a closed circle of misinformation in the Dark Souls universe. All's well that ends well, I say. Using the Lord Vessel, the Chosen Undead can get right back to participating in the fate of the Undead Gwyn prepared. Chosen Undead already grabbed the broken pendant from the Duke's Archives, a repository of knowledge sitting on a hill just outside Anor Londo, connected to the same level. The Duke's Archives has a similar vibe to Anor Londo, but takes on a bluer look, for lack of a better word. It's now an abandoned repository of wizardly knowledge, where the crystal sorcery characteristic of Dark Souls sorcerers has run rampant and now infects every living being. Channelers are the primary targets for the Chosen Undead in the Duke's Archives. They're annoying teleporters who are the aforementioned wizards that didn't participate in ethics in their magical studies and killed everything. At the top of the library, up an elevator, there's a scaleless white dragon carrying the Lord Soul the Chosen Undead seeks. The dragon will kill the Chosen Undead in one blast of crystal sorcery and lock the player in a cell in the Grand Archives. This cell sits in the center of a library jail multi-purpose room. The cells are actually there to hold test subjects upon which experimentation is performed, regardless of ethics or morality. Closing in on the bottommost cell, the Snake Man guards agitate abominations using noise to attack the player. The Duke's Archives is a fairly hellish location where beings from Lordran were kidnapped during the night for Seath's immoral science experiments. Big Hat Logan somehow found a way, despite his self-professed boundless wisdom and intellect, to also get captured at the bottom of the Duke's Archives as the Chosen Undead discovers.
Hello again. What a chance meeting is it? Alas, I'm imprisoned once again. I don't suppose you could stage me a getaway. The Archives. Such a storehouse of knowledge. So close, but just out of reach. The thought offends me so. I could simply die. As a student of the arts, you understand me?
Chosen Undead frees Logan and sends Logan off to do whatever he wants in the archives. Logan will appear later in the library, telling the player the secret of Seath's immortality.
Hello there. I was expecting you. This place is truly magnificent, more than expected even. As promised, I shall share the new sorceries with you, and the secret of Seath's immortality. The secret of Seath's immortality. If you have fought him and were imprisoned, you must know that Seath is a true undead, different from ourselves. His wounds close promptly, and no mortal blow affects him, granting true insulation from death. His wounds close promptly, and no mortal blow affects him, granting true insulation from death. It is an effect of the primordial crystal, a sacred treasure pillaged by Seath when he turned upon the ancient dragons. So only by destroying the primordial crystal can you so much as scratch his hide. And it so happens the primordial crystal is in the inner garden of these very archives, the Crystal Forest. The tomes stored in these archives are truly magnificent. A great pool of knowledge, the fruits of superior wisdom and an unquenchable desire for the truth. Some would say Seath had an unsound fixation. But his work is a beautiful, invaluable resource. All progress demands sacrifice, and I certainly bear no antipathy for that wonderful, scaleless beast.
An error in Logan's recording occurred when 2 takes of the same line were left in his dialogue. Logan's sense of time is being disrupted by the archives and its books. Purchasing Logan's final sorcery from him after leaving Logan to study for a while finds the Chosen Undead being accused of trying to steal Logan's work by Logan.
Who are you? Stay clear of my work. Curses upon you. How dare you disturb me?
Logan's lost his mind in front of the player and has begun the process of hollowing. If the player lets some time pass, Logan will attack the Chosen Undead in the same room Seath originally killed the player in. This battle happens fairly abruptly and is the complete end of Logan's quest, the once distinguished sorcerer reduced to an insane mess. He's no more. Sieglind of Katarina is Siegmeyer of Katarina's daughter, and Sieglind looks exactly like Siegmeyer. Literally, Sieglind is covered head to toe in the same armor as her father Siegmeyer. Sieglind was captured by Seath in some unclear way and ends up finding herself rescued by the Chosen Undead.
It was you who rescued me. Why, thank you. I am Sieglind of Katarina. I don't know how I ended up in that crystal. It wasn't terrible in there, but I could hardly move. I must think of some way to repay you. Oh, have you seen my father? You wouldn't miss him. A suit of armor just like mine. Thank goodness. I knew he was here somewhere. Well then, now I must find him. Thanks again, truly. Now I shall just stay put and keep out of trouble.
Sieglind tells the player that she's in search of her father, who's always getting into trouble. Siegmeyer is such a scamp. Oh, Siegmeyer, what did you get up to this time? What did you get yourself into?
Hello again. We're both managing quite well, aren't we? But I haven't found my father yet. Have you seen him? Really? Then I must be off. I'm sorry he's caused you trouble. He has a knack for that. If you just stay put.
Sieglind teleports back to Firelink Shrine, where she'll again ask for directions towards her father. Siegmeyer, as the player knows, is in a seriously dangerous location somewhere between Blighttown and what lies further below. The Crystal Cave is where Seath's weakness is that Logan told the player about. However, upon approaching the primordial crystal, Seath himself attacks the Chosen Undead. I don't like the Seath boss fight. It's one of my least favorites. His gimmick lasts for approximately one flash in a pan, and then the rest of the fight is just dodging some very similar fire breath attacks. The only other attacks are Seath flailing his tendrils that he has in place of feet around. Two aspects of Seath's fight that stand out as unique are his boss theme, which isn't a soundtrack standout but is literally unique to Seath. The second is that Seath's detachable tail drops the Moonlight Greatsword and is notoriously difficult to cut off. Seath's intro cutscene is just an ambush and then he dies. The most favorable trait of Seath's involvement in the story of Dark Souls is that when the player does kill him, the player can rest assured that the story of one of the most hellish monsters alive in Lordran has finally been ended. Seath was among the worst tyrants in Lordran, as he was Priscilla's father who disowned her and exiled her to a frozen hellscape, used his power to force the residents of Lordran to live in fear of being blackbagged during the night and experimented on, and was explicitly an ally of Gwyn's. One of the quest lines the Chosen Undead has been following up to this point still ends in the Duke's archives, but with that quest accepted, the Chosen Undead can wash their hands of this place. The main quest line is also now 1/4 complete because Seath dropped the Bequeathed Lord Soul Shard. Bequeathed Lord Soul Shards are shards of Gwyn's Lord Soul granted to top generals in his ranks who he believed worthy of their power. The catacombs are directly connected to Firelink Shrine. The little blocked off segment of the player's mind that ignored everything else besides the graveyard in Firelink Shrine can finally be vindicated. Catacombs are a dark network of tunnels running underneath Firelink Shrine and further into the earth than the player has ventured so far. The feeling of this place isn't so much the descent as it is that meme of being on Mr. Skeleton's wild ride. Every enemy in the catacombs is some variation of a reanimated skeleton or necromancer who is just another hollow enemy. The mechanics of the catacombs aren't complicated, just don't get killed by the skeletons and don't fall to your deaths while attempting the catacombs skip. There's a way for the player to forge their weapons in the catacombs as well when they find themselves with Vamos the Blacksmith. Vamos will talk about a couple upgrades you can find throughout the Lance of Lordran, but will only do so after the player's annoyed him enough. Vamos is content to smith his days away. It's his purpose. Having a purpose in Dark Souls seems akin to having impenetrable armor against the threat of hollowing in Dark Souls. Vamos' organic composition having completely decayed off his body. Vamos is literally a skeleton. To complete the theming of the skeletons of the catacombs, falling into a large coffin at the end of the level starts with a cutscene of a bulbously shaped figure completely covered in cloth examining a skeleton on a table. The figure is Pinwheel, a tragic figure who sought the power of the Rite of Kindling to revive a family they lost in the advent of the Undead curse. Pinwheel is notoriously the easiest boss in the game, and it's prolifically speculated upon that the player is supposed to encounter him earlier in the journey, but the possibility that Pinwheel is intentionally easy also exists. The player experience is necessarily a part of the story Dark Souls wants to tell. After all, I've made a point to discuss the music up to this point, so it would be irresponsible not to mention that Pinwheel's boss theme is among the more unique boss themes in the game. The song's low-key nature also leads me to believe that Pinwheel is intended to be a cakewalk by the player. The tomb that Pinwheel was fought in is actually a visual foreshadowing for the area ahead. The Tomb of the Giants is literally too dark to see in. A light source on the player's person is required to play the level, or you can play the level having memorized it. Either way will allow you to play the level. The tomb is another skeleton zone. The zone is fully decked out with massive coffins of unknown origin. Even the massive skeleton enemies are too small to belong to them. A funny bald man some eagle-eyed viewers may recognize kicks the player over an edge early in the zone. Patches. The man hates clerics, and I forgot that in my playthrough, so now I'm at the bottom of this pit. Who was referred to in dialogue with Petrus, whom I killed. Petrus would have turned out to have been a villainous lech, and was actually leading Rhea to harm this whole time, so saving Rhea encourages her to return to the surface and live her life in devout piety and solitude. Rhea seems to blame herself for her companion's fate. Rhea confirms her guilt when you meet her back at the Undead Parish.
There are two fierce hollows not far from here. They were once brave knights, my former escorts. Who would let such strong spirits be hollowed so? Heavens, is there nothing at all to be done?
Rhea wishes to sell miracles and live her life in penance for her actions. Sadly, Rhea's wish will not be granted.
Do not warm easily to unfamiliar faces. The bonfire below is so very frequented it makes it difficult. I have lost all those who were close to me.
Seath's still operative forces will nab Rhea and bring her to their archives, while she'll finally snap under the weight of the non-stop tragedies she's experienced up to this point. Rhea is a hostile NPC when encountered in her cell in the Duke's archives, and the chosen undead mercy kills her as the sole recourse. Returning to the Tomb of the Giants, a few quick pit stops to kill some skeleton enemies, and an invasion by a fallen paladin later. A drop off a quick precipice onto a lower surface later, Gravelord Nito, the next Lord Soul Keeper, plays a cutscene. Nito is pretty neato. The boss fight plays out like a more detailed encounter with the necromancers from the catacombs above. Nito has reanimating skeletons that attack the player at Nito's command, and only when Nito dies will these skeletons also permanently die. The nicest trait of this boss fight is that Nito's large AoE attacks can also hit his skeletons, so the player simply needs to bide their time, and I know the viewer is ready to hear this one, manage their stamina properly to always have enough to escape at the first sign of Nito's attacks being unleashed. Nito drops a Lord Soul upon defeat, granting the chosen undead another 25% of the total power they need to finally empower the Lord Vessel with the power to open the door to Gwyn's prison. 2 more Lord Souls to go. A familiar orange glow comes to mind when considering the lair of Quelaag in the words of Kaelana. The Chaos Servant Covenant was just behind where Quelaag was fought and refuses to go unacknowledged. Where do these spider women come from, and what is the source of their chaos? That'll be something. The Demon Ruins lie just beyond the Chaos Servant Covenant, an orange lava lake amid Corinthian-esque ruined structures. The Ceaseless Discharge guards the lake and is another point in the player's bulletin board of connections drawn to the Witch of Izalith. The Ceaseless Discharge was the lone male offspring of the Witch of Izalith and was utterly rendered unrecognizable as human. The discharge now stands hundreds of feet tall and is utterly inert, standing guard over the remains of one of his sisters, a former Chaos Witch and daughter of the Witch of Izalith. The second interesting thing about the Ceaseless Discharge is he'll attack you once you loot the corpse of his sister, who may actually be Kaelana, raising the question of some sort of contact from beyond situation with Kaelana back in Blighttown. Ceaseless Discharge will also angrily chase you once you disrupt his grieving by looting the corpse and attempting to jump the gap between the lava lake and the precipice the chosen undead stands on. The discharge will narrowly grab the ledge but be left dangling helplessly, allowing the chosen undead to kick the discharge off to his death in one hit. The other way to fight the discharge is to stand on the wide open carved out platform in front of him and dodge his angry tentacle slams and trade hits with the discharge until he's dead. Either way, the ceaseless discharging of the Ceaseless Discharge is finished upon his defeat, drying up the lava lake beneath the player and making it passable. More ancient-looking ruined structures compose the rest of the level of the Demon Ruins. The Demon Ruins are a temple for worship for those who follow the Witch of Izalith. The inhabitants themselves have all become the demons in the name of the ruins after the advent of the domination of chaos over the lands. All of this destruction originates further below with the Witch of Izalith's work in her homeland, now known as Lost Izalith. The assigned guardian of Lost Izalith is the Centipede Demon, who the chosen undead's pal Solaire offers to help with. The boss fight against the Centipede Demon is just the chosen undead and Solaire engaging in some jolly cooperation against various various oversized centipede arm slam attacks, grabs, and protruding leg attacks. Solaire's quest has a much more consequential step in between Lost Izalith and the Demon Ruins, however. Depending on the route the player takes, there are multiple endings to Solaire's quest, and all of them have various moral conundrums associated with them in terms of which way is the happiest ending for Solaire to end up. I killed the centipede demon with Solaire, so Solaire can be found seated in the middle of a hallway mourning the death of his quest.
Was it all a lie? Have I done this all for nothing? Oh, my dear son. What now? What should I do? My son. My dear son.
Solaire's purpose and quest all along was to find his own son, perhaps a metaphor for an ownership of a purpose related to his religion. This appearance for Solaire in Lost Izalith is a total 180 from his demeanor previously. Instead of warm and jolly, Solaire is demoralized and defeated. Nothing the player can do can sway Solaire from his stupor, and we're left to allow him to gather himself back up if he can manage. Oh, sorry buddy. I wish you the best, Solaire. Lost Izalith blooms very brightly. Lost Izalith blooms very, very brightly. I don't need to explain why it blooms so bright, because the unfinished aspect of the latter half of Dark Souls is already incredibly well documented. There's awkwardly placed enemies in a level whose first half lacks variety and dynamism, and then the player gets into Lost Izalith proper. In reality, Lost Izalith's also a very vertically oriented level with another important quest facing a potential resolution in its depths. Another Daughter of Chaos remains down here and has gone insane, attacking the player on sight. Siegmeyer stands above a pit of Chaos Eater enemies, and he's looking down on them.
Oh, excuse me, I was so absorbed in thought I just drifted away. Must be the warmth. Well, what's on your mind? No, don't tell me. Those monsters making life difficult for you? You need not be ashamed. We're all in the same boat, you know. I really have run up quite a debt to you. Perhaps the time has come. Friend, I have an idea, a good one, really. I will rush those dire fiends, and you can slip away in the confusion. Please, friend, I owe you much more than this. By the honor of the Knights of Katarina, allow me to assist you. And now, I go. Don't be slow.
Siegmeyer notices the player while looking down on these enemies. Siegmeyer really considers himself above these enemies. And Siegmeyer really considers himself above the player, despite all the help we've given him tragically. Siegmeyer hatches a half-baked plan to the player about him rushing the enemies so the player can escape. Siegmeyer usually rushes them and instantly dies for me, but he can also be saved where he and his daughter Sieglind will have a bittersweet reunion at the Ash Lake. Sadly, it's very difficult to prevent Siegmeyer from jumping down and not dying quickly with his health scaled to a regular new game cycle. And Siegmeyer's emotions have unfortunately driven him to engage in this incredibly reckless battle because the player has robbed him of his true purpose of chivalrous knighthood all game up to this point, and now he's dead. More importantly, the heart of Lost Izalith is home to the Bed of Chaos, what the Witch of Izalith has morphed into after tampering with her Lord Soul too greatly. A demonic tree with its organic features remaining rooted to the floor, the actual boss fight is widely considered the worst the entire series has to offer to date. The Bed of Chaos is a gimmick boss fight, with 2 weak points spread apart on opposite sides of its arena, with massive hitboxes from the boss swiping you into chasms as the player attempts to navigate the arena. The Bed of Chaos is over-documented. I'll document that I always fight the boss using the cheese strategy, which is the only way to make the fight bearable, and that visually, the Bed of Chaos is memorable and ends up also being memorable for the wrong reasons. It's memorable because it's terrible. With the Bed of Chaos killed, the Chosen Undead's journey to Lost Izalith is complete and 75% of the Lord Soul power has been acquired. What locations has the player not investigated? New Londo frickin' Ruins, and the Darkroot Garden. The Lost City beneath Lordrun is the closest to the abyss the modern world of Dark Souls has come to. New Londo Ruins is a flooded ghost town. Well, ghost city, literally and metaphorically. The ghosts of New Londo's former citizens haunt its former streets and guard the path down to the Four Kings. The Four Kings are the former rulers of New Londo, having given themselves over to the Abyss in exchange for ultimate power, leading the forces of Gwyn to flood the city in an attempt to stop the darkness of the Abyss and humanity from spreading. However, as Ingward, the keeper of the remains of New Londo notes, one can't simply traverse the Abyss.
Well, this is a surprise. I get few visitors, save for ghosts. You have the Lord Vessel. Very impressive. I know exactly what your intentions are. You seek the 4 kings whom I guard over. This is the key to the seal. The 4 kings slumber in the deepest chamber of the ruins. Use this key to break the seal and open the floodgates. Oh, and do not forget, the dark wraiths reside in a dark void called the Abyss. But the Abyss is no place for ordinary mortals. Although, long ago, the knight Artorias traversed the Abyss. If you can find him and learn from him, the Abyss may prove surmountable.
Not unless one wanted to traverse the Abyss the same way Artorias, one of Gwyn's legendary 4 knights, once did. Abyss. Only Artorias the Abyss Walker, who saved the world from the Abyss, holds that secret. Artorias died on a spot familiar to the player. The legends tell of Artorias' heroism in times past against the Abyss. The land of Ulasil still stands somewhere, albeit by a different name, meaning Artorias' last known location is known to the player as well. Artorias is a chivalrous and honorable warrior kept battle compatriots, one of which was a great grey wolf, forever loyal to their master. In Darkroot Garden, Artorias' grave remains like the player once saw it, albeit in a much larger form. The great grey wolf Sif still guards it to this day. Depending on the order Sif is encountered in before Artorias is mercilessly killed by the player in the Dark Souls DLC, a different cutscene will play when beginning the Sif boss fight. Sif will either recognize the player and begin the fight reluctantly, or just treat you with the same standard hostility of a boss fight. Either way, Sif's boss fight is one of the most tragic in the game, as underlined by the music. Sif will aggressively swing Artorias' greatsword in her mouth in wide patterns and combos until she gets to about 15% health. Then, instead of quickly jumping in and out of your range with her animalistic quadrupedal speed, Sif will lose all her combat prowess and begin slowly limping and slowly attacking when she can with her sword. Sif becomes a cakewalk. However, upon defeat, Sif grants the chosen undead Artorias' abyss walking capability. Maybe Sif does this because she thinks the chosen undead is worthy of Artorias' mission as a last will, or maybe the chosen undead is simply pillaging the spoils of the enemy they defeated. The abstract nature of this encounter enables any interpretation you as the player would like to give. The abyss of New Londo ruins is no longer a pit of instant death for the player with the Covenant of Artorias that Sif dropped equipped. At the bottom of the abyss, where humanity is at its strongest in Lordran, are the 4 kings who have a unique theme as well as mechanics. Despite being listed as the 4 kings, these former rulers of New Londo actually spawn endlessly until their community health bar is fully depleted. That means that the 4 kings can actually be more than 4. No intro cutscene for these kings. The outro cutscene shows them fading into light and leaving the player with another bequeathed Lord Soul Shard. With another Lord Soul Shard, add that onto the player's previous power total, that's 100% power. Power to enter Gwyn's gem! Depositing the Lord Souls into the Lord Vessel below Firelink Shrine, whose name is now much clearer, plays a cutscene of the large rune-inscribed door opening under its own power. Passing through is one of the most memorable visuals in all of Dark Souls. A bridge connecting the underground of Firelink Shrine to an impossible space beyond with an open sky is a bridge of the spirits of Gwyn's loyal warriors, the Black Knights, crossing one white void across the bridge to another. These knights will always go to battle for Gwyn, even when their physical bodies have long since perished. Kiln of the First Flame is a land entirely covered in ash with a few remaining corporeal black knights standing sentry in the valley leading to Gwyn. Gwyn's stadium is visible from the entry of the kiln, a large coliseum-like structure built to house the primordial First Flame Gwyn sacrificed everything to keep lit. Solaire's spirit lives on happily, as he's available to summon his help against Gwyn. Entering Gwyn's arena, and the player is hit by his now iconic theme, perhaps Motoi Sakuraba's most prolific work. Gwyn's boss battle is a forlorn struggle with a once ultimate power in the land of Lordran. As the final boss of the video game, Gwyn naturally commands a respect from first-time players, and is also capable of overwhelming the player with attacks faster than anything the video game has thrown at them up to this point. However, Gwyn's equally famous fatal downfall is that he's the only parryable boss in the entire game, meaning that when Gwyn ferociously leaps 20 feet into the air to lay an absolute smackdown on the player, it's possible to unceremoniously deflect the attack and lay into Gwyn with a critically damaging riposte attack. The fight is more or less over in seconds as a result. Gwyn's fight, as with everything else in Dark Souls, is naturally a product of the storytelling that the players engage with through their own actions. Gwyn was obviously, after all, programmed to be parryable by the developers. A common perspective on Gwyn is that despite his ultimate power through the fire, even he wasn't immune to the effects of Hallowing and poetically experienced the most pathetic fate of any character in the game. Gwyn is just now a sad little man driven by a single directive he no longer even has control over. He's a slave to his ambition, and because Gwyn desperately resisted inevitable change, he's now just a sad little zombie like every foot soldier he once sent to their deaths to resist the advent of dark and its change. The two endings available in Dark Souls reflect the player's decision to believe either Koth or Frampt about how to proceed in the world. Either the player chooses ultimate power for themselves and keeps the flame Gwyn died to protect lit. The understated nature amplifies the message of the fire linking ending. A single camera shot starts on the undead as the first flame begins to consume and burn the physical body of the chosen undead. The zoom out shows the flame exploding in power with its brand new kindling, and the power once again begins to consume the entire world. The second ending, where the player turns their back on Gwyn's failed directive and leaves the kiln, shows both Koth and Frampt, as well as numerous other primordial serpents, bowing before the chosen undead and declaring them the new Dark Lord, ushering in the era of humanity. Many fans agree that this ending is the good one of Dark Souls, as a brand new era where the humans that civilization of Lordran were built on the back of will get their chance to live without the oppression under a regime of fire, like Gwyn's regime of fire. Gwyn's oppressive regime of fire. No matter the ending, perhaps the most potent moment in all of Dark Souls is the moment the credits start rolling, and Motoi Sakuraba's personal favorite creation of mine, Nameless Song, starts playing over the credits. Starts with a single voice and a choir a cappella before the strings waltz into the composition and the song gets underway. Nameless Song's immediate presence after either ending presents a haunting image for the future of the land, which was just changed forever. As anyone who's ever played Dark Souls 3 will tell any listener, cycles in the world of Dark Souls are an inevitable reality of the fire and dark's opposition of one another. Almost as if this fact was intended ever since Dark Souls 1, a brand new game cycle automatically starts upon conclusion of the credits in Dark Souls. If I haven't seen the ending of Dark Souls in a while, I will always sit and just listen to Nameless Song play for a while I consider the outcome the ending I chose on the World of Lordran will have. If there's one thing that the ending of Dark Souls really does accomplish, regardless of ending chosen, it's that the chosen undead is perhaps the purest avatar for a player a video game has ever presented for players to control. So as you, the viewer, consider your own place in the world, don't disregard everything that the game of Dark Souls just gave you in your journey. How will you approach your next discomfort? Is it worth the aggressive response or is it worth the passive one? When you have a choice in between both? If I were irresponsible, I'd put a message here telling you to not find yourself crestfallen. After all, you, the viewer, can do it! You've got it in you to succeed! But that message would contradict what Dark Souls itself is saying. The crestfallen warrior and crestfallen merchant weren't villains, at least, not until the game required one of them to hollow out on the player. The scale of the world of Dark Souls happened around those characters and they stopped there, while the chosen undead traipsed their way through the lands with all the ease of someone in another world controlling them as though through a video game. Because it was literally through a video game. The chosen undead could have saved the world after beating Gwyn, but instead just carelessly doomed it again by linking the fire. The world that the chosen undead and crestfallen merchant inhabit was not equally fair to both characters. So perhaps, what would you do, knowing you were more like the chosen undead than the crestfallen warrior or merchant? Every experience that made you this decisive individual looking for your next move, what would it be, finding yourself on the receiving end of the merchant's choice words? Would you selectively be blind to that person? Would you convince yourself you never had that power in the first place, and only worry about your next meal, your next paycheck, and your own rotten luck or good luck? What does that colorful experience you've been lucky to have say about you, make you, decide your next move for you? Who are you? Friends, as I regard everyone who takes the time out to watch my videos is, when a video game is as specific as Dark Souls is, I can't help but feel just a little comfort someone was creative enough to distill their own experiences in a digestible way for me. When I can so acutely experience one emotion from a completely fake world, what does that say about the person who put it there in the first place? Is that person me? Are they Ryan Gosling? Ryan Gosling, who is literally me? Jokes aside, what does the fact that the developer can root around in the old noggin of the player say? Who else has had this experience with Dark Souls, and what should I do about it? Do these lines of codes really have something larger to say I should pay attention to, and is this community that I'm feeling as real and important as it seems like it is? Thanks for watching.